Hallo Leute, was gesagt, willkommen zurück zu Livestream auf meinem Kanal. Und heute sind wir hier für die letzte Sachen zu hören, die Martial Gun mäßig und dazu noch zwei Short Stories, muss wir dann noch auch anhören. Und ja, ohne zu Zeit verlieren, wir starten mal mit dem Martial Fußholz als erstes. Dann ja, wir hören uns dann später bevor wir starten mit die anderen zwei Geschichten dann uns dann filmen. Und ja Leute, legen wir los.
He in the old days, about knew that when Marshall knew that when he was younger, he wanted to be a rescue pup. He had heard stories about how his parents always saved lives when they were top fire pups back in the old days. When he met Ryder and the other pups of Paw Patrol, it seemed like a chance to follow in his parents' paws and be a great fire pup as well. Marshall was proud of his accomplishments, but today wasn't one of those days. It was actually one of his really bad klutzy days. Already he broke a farmer apples, caused the mayor to get into an accident, and maybe peed in a bush that was home to an angry wet squirrel. On his way home to the lookout, he felt like a cloud was hanging over his head and ready to pour. I can't do anything right. Seriously, all I've done today is mess everyone's day. Hey, Marshall, cried out Zuma as he turned around and saw him alongside Chase, Sky, and Rocky by a volleyball net. Wanna play some volleyball, dude? He kicked the ball over to Marshall, who stopped and stared at it. As much as he loved to play, he didn't think that his bad luck streak was going to help. I don't know. Come on, said Rocky, shaking his tail. Just pass the ball. Marshall smirked and nodded. Okay. Check this move out. He knocked the ball into the air with his nose and jumped up for a spike. Closing his eyes, he brought his paw down as hard as he could and heard the sound of something crashing, which made his heart sink. Uh-oh. Opening his eyes as he landed, he saw that all four of his friends were wrapped up in the net and hanging in the air. Marshall gave a nervous smile and stepped back as his friends glared at him. Nice spike, muttered Chase before the ball came down and hit him on the head, bringing the four down with a crash. Marshall quickly stopped the ball from leaving the area before turning to the others who were helping each other out. Sorry about that, guys. Want me to help you out? No, they shouted, making him step back. Chase sighed. I think you've done enough for one day, Marshall. Oh, okay, sorry, whispered the Dalmatian, whimpering. The others looked at each other with less angry expressions, but before anyone could do anything, Rubble rushed out of the lookout. Guys! The new Apollo, the Super Pup cartoon is on. This instantly brought a cheer to all the pups and they barked with joy. Each of them made their way towards the lookout, but before Marshall could enter, Rocky stopped him with his paw. Hey, you made the mess. You got to clean it up. He pointed to the volleyball equipment. Marshall nodded in understanding and rushed towards the mess. He first gathered the poles, deciding to bring them inside first, and took them with his mouth. Just as he was about to turn and put them in the shed, he suddenly found his paw on the volleyball that had rolled over. Whoa, he shouted, the ball rolling under his feet as he began to spin and roll around. The poles in his mouth were starting to come loose as he tried to gain a sense of balance. He found himself rolling into the living room from the outside door where the other pups were laughing at the cartoon on the big screen. Marshall tried to give off a warning, but he finally lost his balance and fell forward with a big crash. Even worse, the poles flew straight out of his mouth and towards his friends. Look out! The pups turned around and gasped before ducking as the pole sailed over them. Marshall sighed in relief upon seeing his friends unhurt, but gasped when the pole smashed into the TV, breaking it and shutting the cartoon off for static. Everyone got up and gasped in horror upon seeing their TV ruined, but then that quickly changed to rage when they glared at Marshall, who was doing his best to look like an invisible mouse. Cowering before his friends, Marshall knew he screwed up big time, and unlike his previous mistakes, this one he couldn't counter with a joke. Sorry," he whimpered. "Sorry?" "Sorry," shouted Chase, growling at the fire pup. "All you ever do is say sorry. You could have hurt us with your clumsy attitude. Even worse, you broke the TV. Can't you do anything right, Marshall?" "Now we'll never see the how Apollo saves the day," shouted Rubble, who looked more disappointed than anything. Noon was more of a fan of the super dog than him. He growled, a rare feat for the usually kind and gentle bulldog. "Why can't you just be like the rest of us and not mess things up?" "I don't mean to," muttered Marshall, tears appearing in his eyes. "Doesn't matter. Every day. Every time. You always screw things up. I don't even know why you're in Paw Patrol if all you do is make disasters all the time," screamed Sky, getting the nod of approval from the others. "Seriously dude, this is just not cool," said Zuma, shaking his head before turning away. "Maybe you should go mess someone else's fun," muttered Rocky before following Zuma. The rest follow suit, with the last being Chase, who Marshall couldn't believe was even doing this. They had been best friends since they first met and was the one who Marshall cared about the most. "Chase, do you really see me like that?" "Marshall, sometimes you really are an annoyance," said Chase, shaking his head. That was too much for Marshall. He just started crying and ran out of the lookout as fast as he could. Chase froze when he saw this and was about to call out his name, but stopped and shook his head. Maybe he'll finally stop being so clumsy. Still, a part of Chase wondered if he went too far. Hiding in his doghouse, Marshall never cried as hard as he did in his life until now. Hugging his pillow, he continued to sob into it as felt his heart shattered into pieces. His own friends, the pups he worked and played with for years, hated him. Hearing such awful things his so-called friends had said about him, he could still hear them in his head. Even Chase, who was like a brother to him, called him an annoyance. "They hate me. All of them. And worst of all, they're right." How many times had he been a klutz and ruined their games or fun? How many master, and it was better for everyone if he, removing his head from his tear-soaked pillow, he glanced at a photo of him and his parents, dressed in firefighter gear. Who am I kidding? I'll never be as great as Mom and Dad. I shouldn't even be in Paw Patrol. Marshall stood up and walked outside where he saw Adventure Bay, the town that had been his home for years. He had protected and helped so many people here, but it looked like it was all over now. If my friends don't want me, then maybe I should live somewhere else. Away from Paw Patrol. Someplace they'll never find me. He glanced over towards the nearby snowy mountains and came to a realization. That's it. I'll just live up in the mountains. It's got snow, cute penguins, and I can still help people by finding lost skiers. Plus, Everest and Jake live nearby and they don't hate me. Maybe I can convince them to keep my location a secret from the others. With his mind set, Marshall began packing for his new life. Dog treats. Chew toys. Food and water bowls. Blankets. Winter gear. My pup pack. Looks like I got everything, thought Marshall as he wrapped them all up and put them in his trunk. Marshall, donned in his uniform, got on his fire truck and turned it on. He stopped himself from hitting the gas pedal and turned towards the tower for one last look. The lookout had been such a great place to live, and being part of Paw Patrol were some of the best times of his life. Ryder had been a great owner, and the best big brother ever. Chase was his best friend, and always looked after him. Everyone else was like family to him, and he thought their days as friends would never end. Until now. So long, Paw Patrol, whimpered Marshall before he pressed the gas pedal and quietly left the lookout. Hours had passed since their spat with Marshall, and the other pups were bored out of their minds. They had told Ryder that the TV was broken, and he said he would get a new one. That still meant no Apollo or even Pup Boogie, another thing to be angry at Marshall about. Currently, they were each doing their own thing to stave off the boredom. Rocky was reading a book about Thomas Edison, Rubble and Zuma were napping under a tree, Chase was doing push-ups, and Sky was flicking a rock back and forth. Ugh, so bored, whined Sky as she rolled onto her stomach and glanced at the sky. It looked like there wasn't going to be any bad weather, so it gave her an idea. I'm going to ask Ryder if I can fly today, she said as she got up and headed to the lookout. "'Kay," said Chase and Rocky, while Zuma and Rubble just snored. While watching Sky leave, Chase stopped doing his push-ups and turned to Rocky. "Hey, Rocky, do you think we were a little harsh on Marshall?" Rocky paused in turning a page before sighing. "Maybe, but can you honestly tell me you haven't always wanted to yell at him for his mistakes?" Chase stayed silent, but his gut was telling him that something was wrong. He got up and stretched his legs. "I'm going to talk to him." He didn't even wait for a response, he just rushed to the other side of the lookout where Marshall's doghouse was. But when he arrived, he grounded to a halt at the sight of nothing. The fire truck was gone, as was Marshall. "Marshall? Marshall?" Chase cried out, but there was no response. Concerned, he taped his communicator tag for Marshall. "Hey, Marshall? You there?" No response. "Marshall?" When he got silence a second time, Chase felt that worry in his gut grows even more. Guess he's still mad at us, or maybe Ryder has him doing something. He quickly called for his owner. Ryder was just about to finish the latest level off his space shooter video game when a call from Chase came in. Pausing, he accepted the message and saw Chase's face on the pup pad. "Hey, Chase. What's up?" "Ryder, sir, have you seen Marshall?" "His truck is missing, and I can't find him," said Chase, looking around in worry. "No, I haven't. I'll call him up and see where he is," answered Ryder as he turned off Chase and called for his fire pup. A few seconds later, he saw Marshall, driving in his truck. "Hello?" asked Marshall, a bit surprised he was being contacted. "Hey, Marshall. Where are you?" "The pups are looking for you," said Ryder. Upon hearing this, Marshall closed his eyes before growling, much to Ryder's surprise. "Marshall? I don't care, tell the other pups I'm done being a bother to them and they don't have to worry about me anymore. If I'm such an annoyance like they said, then I'm better off on my own. I'm done with them and Paw Patrol," answered Marshall, trying to hide a tear dripping down his cheek. Ryder gasped as he held the pad with both hands. Dozens of questions entered Ryder's head, but the first thing to do was to calm Marshall down and get him to explain. "Marshall, you can't quit. The team needs you. Look, just come on home and we'll sort this out." Marshall shook his head. "Sorry, Ryder, but I made up my mind. I'm a lone pup now. I'm going to miss you. Thank you for taking care of me. Marshall out, for the last time." The communication was cut as Ryder stood there, still in disbelief. He tried calling Marshall again and again, but nothing. Marshall had cut him off. As Ryder tried to think about what to do, Sky came up on the elevator with a smile. Hey, Ryder? I was wondering if I could go flying since it's a great dash. What did you guys say to Marshall? Shouted Ryder, turning around with a furious scolding look. Sky gasped and whimpered upon hearing her owner's angry tone. Answer me, Sky. Now. We were just angry that he messed up the TTTV. And we may have. Sky shivered and felt her ears fatten as Ryder's glare got harsher and harsher. T told him he was a burden to the team and said he screwed up a lot, among other things. Ryder rubbed his temples and did his best to keep calm. Getting too angry right now would not solve anything. He needed to get Marshall home and he needed the rest of the pups to help, even if they were the ones that caused this. Well, I hope you're happy, Sky. Because Marshall decided to run away. Run away, shouted Sky in horror. I didn't think he'd take that bad. It's Marshall. He's always happy. Would you be happy if your best friends called you worthless and insulted you? Breaking your spirit? Asked Ryder. Sky lowered her head in shame and began to cry. Oh, what have we done? Marshall. She shook her head. We have to get him back, Ryder. He's part of our team. And we're gonna get him back, Sky. Ryder pressed the button of all the Paw Patrols. Sky just sat there, praying that Marshall was all right and they could fix their mistake. Oh, Marshall. I'm so sorry. How could we have said those things? Paw Patrol. Look out. Now. The rest of the pups knew something was wrong by the tone of Ryder's voice and the urgency behind it. None the others decided to do their usual call-out and rushed as quickly as they could towards the elevator. On the way, Rubble looked around and asked, Hey, where's Marshall? He's not here, answered Chase as they entered the doors. Even his truck is gone. I hope nothing happened to him. The four reached the elevator and waited. And waited. This is weird, said Zuma, looking around. We're all still standing. Usually, when Marshall's here, we're all on our backs. Yeah, without him it just seems empty, second Rocky. The others just nodded in agreement as the elevator started to move. Getting into their uniforms, they jumped out and lined up next to a downtrodden Sky as Chase stood in attention. Paw Patrol, ready for act, tie-in. Super Spy Chase's voice died down as he and the other pets were met with an angry Ryder. Gulping, Chase finished, Ryder, sir? Ryder, with his arms crossed, stayed silent for a bit before shaking his head. Pups, I'm really disappointed in you. What? Why? They asked, except for Sky. Because I had to find out that you five insulted and bullied Marshall earlier for making a mistake, pointed out Ryder. The others winced as Rocky whispered, We were just angry. Well, I hope you're happy because your angry words have forced Marshall to run away. The four pups gasped as Sky, nearly turning white, pressed his communicator tag. Marshall. Come in, buddy. Please. The others tried their tags as well, but they got nothing. Zuma shook his head. Marshall wouldn't run away. He loves being a Paw Patrol. He loves us. But we were really hard on him, muttered Rubble, doing his best not to try. He must think we hate him. What have we done? Whispered Rocky. Chase, to everyone's surprise, turned around and began hitting his paws on the elevator. Stupid. So stupid. How could I have said that to him? I called him an annoyance. An annoyance? What kind of leader What kind of friend am I? Chase held in anger before falling on his haunches and began to tear up. How could I have said those things? Ryder walked up to him and held him, letting the super spy pup cry on his shoulder. As mad as he was at them, he knew that they were just as hurt as he was about Marshall leaving. The others were just as emotional as Chase, and seeing the strongest of them act like this brought the seriousness straight home. Rubble gulped as he wiped the tears from his face. What are we going to do? We don't know where Marshall is. What if we never see him again? Shouted Sky with worry. We have to find him, shouted Rocky, stepping forward, and we have to tell him how much we care about him. We have to say we're sorry. Right you are, Rocky, said Ryder, getting up and grabbing his pad. We need all paws on deck for this one. Each of us will be splitting up to search for Marshall. Zuma, you check the beaches and water. Rubble, check the outskirts of town like Yumi's farm. Rocky and I will check the town. Chase, you and Sky check the forest and mountain area. If any of you see or get a hint of where Marshall is, call us. The pups didn't even bother to shout out their catchphrase, the situation was just too serious. All they could think about was Marshall and his safety. Ryder headed for the pole towards his ATV, while the pups went through the slide and into their respective vehicles. As he was ordered, Rubble had taken off for the outskirts of town in his search for Marshall. Along the way, Rubble did his best to resist crying until he had separated from the others. When he did, he finally unleashed the waterworks. He didn't like anyone seeing him cry. It was bad enough he was the youngest out of the group, even younger than Everest, who had only been a Paw Patrol member for a few weeks, but he didn't want to be seen as a crybaby. However, this was one moment he could let go of his desire to look more grown up. Guilt hung his heart by the neck as he wished he could take back what he said about Marshall. He was a great pup and a great Paw Patrol member. By the time he finished crying, he had arrived at Farm Yumi and Ayel's barn. The recently married couple had agreed to help find Marshall by searching their fields. It had been half an hour since then, and Rubble had been calling for Marshall without stop, even trying his communicator tag. Stopping his bulldozer in front of the farm, Rubble looked around again for any sign of the Dalmatian. Suddenly, he gasped with joy upon seeing what looked like a cloud with puffs of black dots between a stack of hay. I only know one Dalmatian that has that look. He joyfully drove his bulldozer to the hay pile and used it to move the hay, only to realize that it was one of the cows instead. Hey! You're not a Dalmatian. You're not even Marshall. The cow rolled its eyes before walking away. Rubble sighed before dropping the hay back. He's not here. Maybe I should check the other areas. But what if he's already long gone from Adventure Bay? The thought that he could never see his buddy again made Rubble whimper. I can't believe I said those things to him. Sure, he screws up, but all of us do. Even me. Heck, I screwed up a lot when I first joined. Okay, Rubble, you can do this, Rubble muttered to himself as he leaned forward from his seat. It had been a week since he had officially joined Paw Patrol. While he hadn't been sent on missions yet, it gave him plenty of time to learn how to use the bulldozer Ryder had given him as the new construction pup. At the moment, he was still getting used to the controls and trying to lift a large hill of sand as practice. Turning his truck, he held with the engine roaring as he shouted, "Rubble on the double." He pressed his paw down on the gas, only he felt his bulldozer head backwards instead. Gasping, the bulldog realized he had left the stick in reverse. More like Rubble is in trouble. His bulldozer continued to move backwards until it slammed into a tree, nearly knocking the wind out of Rubble. Moaning, he turned it off and sighed, "I'm never going to get this down." "Hey, Rubble. What's going on?" Rubble turned his head to see the Paw Patrol's fire rescue pup, Marshall, walking towards him with a smile on his face. "Hey, you're trying out the bulldozer Ryder made. How's it working?" "It works fine, it's me that's not working right," sighed Rubble, sinking into his chair. "Really?" asked Marshall, jumping up and landing near the bulldog. "What's wrong?" "I keep screwing up. I want to be a Paw Patrol member so badly, but every time I try to do this thing I keep forgetting something," said the saddened pup. "Maybe I'm not cut out to be a construction pup." "Hey, don't think that. If Ryder thinks you're perfect for the team, then I trust him. Besides, everyone screws up. I even did when I started using my fire truck," said Marshall, putting a paw on Rubble's shoulder. "What did you do?" Marshall blushed and chuckled. "Every time I used my ladder, I used to always come down riding on my butt. It got really sore and red, to the point where I could have been named Marshall, the Red Butt Pup." Rubble snorted before laughing out loud, imagining the sight of such a thing. "That's so funny. Did you get better?" "Oh, I did. But I still fall on it occasionally. While also getting in a ton of other crashes, as you well know," pointed out Marshall. "Like this afternoon when you slipped on Zuma's marbles and slammed your head into Ryder's pizza?" asked Rubble. "Yeah, but that was worth it for the pepperoni," said Marshall, rubbing his stomach and licking his lips at the memory. "The point is, we all screw up a bit. You just need to keep practicing, and you'll be awesome in no time." "Okay. Let's give it another go," shouted Rubble. He turned on the bulldozer and this time remembered to put it in drive. Pressing forward, Rubble grit his teeth with determination as he lowered his large blade and began scooping up the sand. "Yeah. I did it." The two dogs began to bark with joy until Marshall gasped. "Wait, Rubble. You forgot to stop the blade." The two watched as the scooper continued going up until it reached the top and tipped the sand to pour on top of them. The two dogs held their breath until they were covered in a pile of sand, head down. Popping out of it, they looked at each other and just laughed at the sight of themselves. "Hey, when you're done, do you want to watch Apollo the Super Pup with me?" asked Marshall. Rubble tilted his head. "Who's Apollo?" Rubble chuckled at the memory. True to Marshall's word, he did get better as time went on, and was just as good as the rest of his friends. He then whimpered again when he realized that he had insulted the very pup who had given him the confidence to be who he was today by calling him a screw-up. But Marshall's helped save the day so many times, even with his screw-ups. Yet I yelled at him, all for messing up my favorite cartoon that he introduced me to. A cartoon was just a cartoon. It could be seen again, even on demand. But a friend was irreplaceable. Vowing to never see another Apollo cartoon until he found Marshall, Rubble continued on his search. Zuma had searched every beach there was in Adventure Bay, but no luck in finding Marshall. None of the people or animals on the beach had seen him either. That left only the ocean and nearby islands to search for his buddy, but Zuma doubted Marshall was at any of them. Granted, any of the islands would have been a great place to run away, but Marshall would have known that Zuma could have tracked him down with his hovercraft. Deciding to report in, Zuma hit his communicator tag for Ryder. "Zuma here. No sign of Marshall. I'm gonna twice Seal Island and any of the other Niue ones. I doubt he went there, but we can't leave no place unchecked. Search wherever you can, Zuma. Ryder out." Zuma sighed as he heard arfing and turned to the right to see Wally the walrus waving at him, fish in his mouth. "Hey, Wally. have you seen Marshall? Wally shook his head, but in turn threw the fish out of his mouth and hit Zuma straight on the snout. Zuma shook it off and Wally caught it again. Ugh, thanks anyway, dude. Wally arfed goodbye as Zuma began to wonder about Marshall again. If Marshall had run away, their words must have been a lot harsher than they mean to be. Zuma didn't hate Marshall, he really cared about him a great deal. He was brave, funny, and always willing to be helpful. As the second youngest, he saw all his peers as his big brothers or sisters. Chase was the responsible big brother. Sky was the graceful sister. Rocky was the smart brother. Rubble, despite being younger than Zuma, was the playful little brother. And Marshall was the fun big brother. The kind who could keep you smiling no matter what. And with Ryder acting like a father figure to them, it was like having a family. And we had our family by shooting Marshall, thought Zuma. Turning his head, he noticed a boat rental shop that brought Zuma back towards his first mission, where he saw just how awesome Marshall was. Not to mention how dedicated he was to his duty as a fire pup. Although he had been hoping his first mission as a member of Paw Patrol would be big, Zuma didn't expect it to be this big. An electrical fire had caused a boat rental shop to catch fire, and the entire team was needed to handle it. Marshall took the lead by using his fire truck to spray water at the building while Chase kept the growing crowd away from danger. Sky was keeping an eye on things in the air, being mindful of the smoke, while Zuma and Rocky were in charge of making sure the nearby boats didn't catch on fire. Zuma was surprised by how calm the team was. They had only been operational for a few months, but they were acting like pros. Zuma, having only been around for 2 weeks, couldn't help but be impressed. While Rocky was using his tools to unhook the boats and tying them to the hovercraft, Zuma was ordered to bring them to the other side of the bay as far from the fire as possible. That's the last one, Ryder, said Zuma, calling his new owner. He watched as Rocky tied the rope of the last boat to the harbor. Great job, Zuma and Rocky. You guys head back here and dash. Help! Help! That's my store, shouted the voice of a woman. Zuma activated his view screen on his tag and saw a blonde woman talking Ryder. That's my shop. Oh my gosh. My son's in there. Both Zuma and Rocky gasped at the thought of a kid inside that huge fire. Zuma had never seen a fire as big as this one before. If a human is in there. Ma'am. Which floor is your child on? Asked Marshall, running into view. Second floor, by the back of the house. Marshall looked to be in deep concentration before a look of determination appeared on his face. Arf. Oxygen mask, a red mask settled onto Marshall's face as he turned to Ryder. I'm going in, Ryder. Have someone else take the hose, and keep spraying the shop. Ryder nodded. Okay. Marshall, you head inside, and find that child. Be careful. Ready for a rough rescue. Zuma, you and Rocky head back here to help with the fire. Green means go. Let's dive in. Rocky jumped back onto the hovercraft as Zuma went full speed ahead. Along the way, Zuma couldn't help but worry if maybe Marshall was in over his head. Hey, Rocky? Will Marshall be okay? It's Rocky and Marshall, Zuma, said Rocky. Sorry, my speech impairment is something I've had to live with, replied Zuma. Rocky nodded. Anyway, Marshall will be fine. He's been training to do this ever since he was born. He'll be okay. Despite his goofiness, he's a good fire pup. Zuma barked in agreement and soon made it to the closest harbor with the flaming shop close by. Before Zuma could follow Rocky out, an explosion from the shop nearly blew the pups off their paws as a giant fireball shot out into the air. Holy cow! Did you see that, dude? Shouted Zuma. Yeah, but Marshall was still in there, shouted Rocky with horror. Pressing his tag, Rocky called out, Ryder. Is Marshall okay? I don't know. I'm trying to get in contact with him. Sky, where did that explosion come from? Second floor. And I could see that fireball all the way up here. Zuma gulped. If it was really that big, then did that mean that Marshall and the child were? Asterisk cough Marshall here. I'm okay. Both Zuma and Rocky sighed in relief upon hearing their teammate's voice. Ryder then spoke. Marshall, what happened? It's my fault. I had to dodge a falling piece of wood, but I knocked over a gas can. The explosion blocked my exit, but I found the kid. He's okay, but we need to find a way out before we run out of air. Can you see any way out? Asked Ryder. There was a brief pause before Marshall answered. Yeah, I think I have a way, but I'll need Zuma's help. What do you need me do, Marshall? Asked Zuma. Marshall giggled. Sorry, still getting used to hearing my name sound like that. Anyway, there is a window in the kids' room that's right over the water. We can jump in and Zuma can bring us to land. Sounds like a plan. You hear that, Zuma? Asked Ryder. On my way, shouted Zuma as he turned his hovercraft back on and made for the store. Although the flames intimated him, Zuma wasn't going to be a scaredy pup when his friend needed him. He reached the end of the rental where the flames hadn't touched yet and saw the widow Marshall was talking about. Tapping his communicator, Zuma said, Marshall. I'm here. Great. Watch out below. Arf. Axe. The sound of a window smashing alerted Zuma to the window where he saw a red axe smash it up, giving Marshall a clear path for the water. The kid, a blond boy who had to be around 7 years old, was right beside him. Getting an idea, Zuma cried out, Arf. Buoy. The front of his hovercart opened and shut out a buoy with a line into the water. Marshall. Have the kid jump into the buoy. Good idea, Zuma. We're gonna jump. 3, 2, 1, shouted Marshall as he and the kid jumped. The kid screamed a bit, but he managed to land perfectly in the buoy while Marshall splashed into the water next to him. Spitting out water, Marshall pushed the kid to the hovercraft where he climbed in. Thanks for rescuing me. Can I get to my mom now? Asked the kid. Sure thing, little dude, said Zuma with a smile before turning to Marshall, who shook himself dry. Dude, that was awesome. Thanks, said Marshall with a smile. He tapped his tag. Marshall here. We got the kid, Ryder. We're coming back to bring him to his mommy. Great work, pups. See you soon. Glad to see you're still one piece. I thought you were gonna break your promise for a second there, said Chase, trying to sound professional, but Zuma could detect a hint of worry. Marshall chuckled. Don't worry, Chase. I never break my promises. Marshall out. What promise are you talking about? Asked Zuma. Marshall turned to Zuma and said, nothing. Just something we did when we were younger. Let's get back to shore. I got a fire to put out. You're still up for Mao? Aren't you tired? Asked Zuma. Is the fire still burning? Asked Marshall with a grin. Then so am I. He was a hero that day, thought Zuma with a smile as he gazed at the newly repaired shop. And not just that day. The time he sacrificed his chance to be world's fastest fire pup. The day he won the basketball game for Adventure Bay. And when he saved those kitties all on his own. Marshall's been hero through and through. Marshall wasn't just a fire pup. He was the most awesome fire pup ever. Zuma only hoped they never lost him as he continued his way towards Seal Island. Marshall sighed in relief as he came out from behind the tree. Nothing like a pit stop after a long drive. And this time, no angry squirrels. He had made good time so far on his journey to Jake's Mountain and decided to stop for lunch. Reaching into his bag in his truck, he dragged out some dog bisects and began to eat. Honey flavored. Rubble's favorite. He frowned upon thinking of his former friend and thought about how much fun he and the other pups used to challenge Rubble to eat as much as he could. For a little pup, he sure ate a lot and made a lot of messes when he did. Marshall chuckled, thinking on the day Ryder took the to their first public restaurant and Rubble end up eating the entire buffet in an hour. Good thing it was all you can eat. Marshall shook his head. No, don't think about them anymore. They don't want to be your friend, so you don't need to think about them. He packed the food away, finding himself no longer hungry. Maybe I just need a good rest. That's all. He lay on the grass and closed his eyes, hoping to get some Zs before hitting the road again. It was actually kind of nice to be sleeping in the wilderness instead of the lookout. No sound of Ryder or the other pups doing what they were doing. Not even Zuma, snoring beside him. The two of them curling next to each other in case they had a bad dream. Zuma always used to have those, so each of the team slept next to him in his first weeks at the lookout. Marshall began to slowly lose focus and fell into a good sleep, but never noticed the tear dripping down his cheek. Looking to take a pet, feeling some didn't work, or failure was something Rocky couldn't stand. Whenever one of his inventions didn't work or he got something wrong during a mission, he took it hard. It wasn't that he was a perfectionist, he was okay with messing up on things that didn't seem important, like a game or competition. But failing somebody close to him, that was the worst of it all. His dislike of failure all stemmed back to his days at the orphanage for pets. Every day he would try his hardest to get adopted by a family looking to take a pet home with them. And every day he failed. For a long time, Rocky didn't think he would ever get adopted until one day, when he was cleaning up the orphanage like he always did, he met Ryder. The mixed breed had been collecting trash outside the orphanage to use for his inventions when he saw Ryder checking said inventions in Rocky's room. He explained what each of them did and had fun playing with Ryder. Ryder quickly offered Rocky a place in the Paw Patrol as their recycling pup, as well as a home to live in. That was the happiest day in Rocky's life. Paw Patrol was his new home, and the pups were his new family. And Rocky promised on the day he arrived at the lookout that he would never fail his new family. And yet here I am, looking for a friend who I failed horribly, thought Rocky as he watched Ryder ask Alex and his friends at the playground if they had seen Marshall. The pups had fought before, even argued at times, but they never had something like this happen. Looking back, Rocky couldn't help but realize that their words were way too harsh. Yeah, Marshall's clumsy behavior did mess things up a lot, but he was still a good friend. Besides, everybody on the team had their quirks. Rubble was always trying to act more mature to compensate for being the youngest. Zuma had his speech impairment. Sky and Chases obviously had crushes on each other, but neither could admit it. And Rocky himself was afraid of water. The more he thought about how foolish he and the other pups had been, the more it drove Rocky to find Marshall and apologize. If only it were that easy. They had been driving through town all day, yet there wasn't a single sign of Marshall. They had asked other residents from Katy to Mayor Goodwill, but they hadn't seen him. The mayor promised to get all the townsfolk to look for him, but Rocky was pretty sure Marshall was long gone from Adventure Bay. He wanted to tell Ryder, but he was too nervous to. Throughout their search, Ryder barely say anything to Rocky, and his angry face from earlier was still fresh in the pup's mind. Ryder had been disappointed, scolding even if things got too rough, but never as angry as he was when he learned what they had done. It made Rocky feel even guiltier by the fact that he had failed his owner, the one who gave him his new life. Still, despite his fear of angering Ryder further, finding Marshall was a top priority. When Ryder came back to his ATV, Rocky sat in his recycling truck while rubbing his paws. One of Alex's friends said they saw Marshall's fire truck heading down Church Street. Let's see if any of the shops have seen him. Ryder asked Rocky just as his owner put on his helmet. I don't think we'll find him in Adventure Bay. He's had hours ahead of us, and considering some of the people we talked to said they saw him heading in the direction of the exit to town, I think it's safe to assume he's long gone from this location. Ryder rubbed his chin before nodding. You make a good point. Chase and Sky are in that area, so we'll join up with them. Do you think he's heading back to his parents? Where do they live anyway? Asked Rocky. Are in that area, so we'll join up with them. Somewhere down south of the state. If we don't find him in the evening, I'll alert them, said Ryder, getting on his ATV. Lowering his head, Rocky asked, Ryder? Do you hate us for what we did? Ryder looked at Rocky with shock before he shook his head and gave a sad smile. Rocky, I could never hate you pups. You're my best friends. I'm just upset that you would say that to Marshall after everything he's done. Why did you say those things anyway? I don't know. I guess we were just angry that his mistakes kept breaking stuff, whispered Rocky. It's not a good excuse, I know. I bet he hates us. Marshall would never hate you pups. Don't you remember when he took care of you when you got bullied? Rocky's eyes widen at the memory. Heading back home on 3 good legs was a pain, but it was better than depending on a badly injured one. Rocky winced as he felt the bite mark on his right front leg hurt worse as he walked up the hill towards the lookout. Each time he or something else touched it, it would sting like crazy to the point where Rocky was nearly in tears. It wasn't as bad as the shiner on his left eye though. As he reached the front of the lookout, all he had to do was get to his doghouse and avoid being seen by the other pups. Thankfully, they were all focused on Chase testing out his new super spy outfit and gadgets. Rocky was about to sneak away when Marshall noticed him and rushed over. Hey, Rocky. Wanna see Chase use his suction cup boots? Maybe later. I'm just gonna go to bed, said Rocky, doing his best to have his face being seen. You okay? You seem kind of off. Hey, where's your hat? You were wearing it when you went out earlier, pointed out Marshall. I lost it. Now, if you excuse me, lied Rocky as he tried to move away from Marshall. Marshall gasped. Lost it? Don't worry. We'll use Chase's nose to find it. Before Rocky could do anything, Marshall reached out for his injured leg and jerked. Rocky yelped in pain before falling to his side whimpering. Rocky? Are you okay? Screamed Marshall before he noticed the shiner on Rocky's eye. Whoa. What happened? Help. Whimpered Rocky, unable to take the pain anymore. All right. Guys. Rocky's injured, shouted Marshall, getting the attention of the others. They all rushed over and gasped at the sight him. What happened? Asked Rubble. I swear I just touched him and he was suddenly in pain, answered Marshall. It looks like he got beat up, shouted Sky. Chase tagged his dog tag and shouted into it. Ryder, sir, we got an injured paw patroller who needs help. It's Rocky. I'm on my way, Chase. Keep him still till I get there. Chase walked over and put a paw on Rocky's shoulder. It's okay. Ryder's coming. Rocky nodded as he hoped his owner could fix this. feeling better, Walkie? Asked Zuma as the gang watched Ryder finish wrapping up his leg in the medical room. Beside the leg brace, Rocky had an ice pack over his hurt eye that he held with his good paw. Yeah, much better, replied the injured pup. Ryder rubbed Rocky on his back and asked, Rocky, how did you get injured? I took a closer look at that wound and it was definitely from a bite. A dog bite specifically. You mean someone attacked Rocky? Asked Sky before growling. What kind of jerk would do that? Rocky whimpered, but Ryder held him in his arms and began to pet him. It's okay, Rocky. You can tell us. Rocky hesitated, but sighed. Knowing that they weren't going to drop this, he decided to come out and say it. It was Butch, Crash, and Sharper. They ambushed me, called me a nerd, beat me up, and took my hat. Those three? I should have known, growled Chase, who looked ready to tear something apart with his teeth. Who are they? Asked Ryder. They're 3 dogs that live at the junkyard near town. They're always causing trouble. Like stealing food, knocking over trash cans, or bullying dogs smaller than them, answered Rubble. Yeah, they've made one of my speech all the time, said Zuma, lowering his head. They say I talk like this, because I'm retarded. They what? Shouted Chase and Ryder. Okay, I've had enough of these 3. We have to do something to them, Ryder, sir, shouted Chase. Ryder gentle put Rocky on the medical bed and nodded. Right, these 3 want to keep hurting our friends. I say we teach them a lesson, and get Rocky's hat back. Am I right? The pups all howled with anticipation as Rubble jumped up and said, I know where those creeps hang out. And I can use my sniffer to sniff them out, said Chase as he followed Rubble out of the room. Wait for us. I got to see this, shouted Sky, followed by Zuma. Ryder was about to follow when he noticed that Marshall wasn't moving. Marshall? You coming along? The Dalmatian glanced at Rocky, who was nursing his eye before turning to Ryder with a smile. You go on ahead, Ryder. I'm going to watch over Rocky. Okay. Be back as soon as we can, said Ryder before exiting. Marshall barked goodbye before jumping onto the bed and taking a seat next to Rocky. Are you feeling better? Not as bad as I did before, but better, thanks, muttered Rocky. There was a long silence between the two as neither said anything to the other. Rocky wished he was just alone so he could do something, but without his good leg or his eye, he was limited. Worst of all, I can't read or invent. This stinks. Why did you try to hide your injuries? And the fact you were being bullied by those jerk dogs, asked Marshall. Rocky closed his eyes and shook his head. It's not the first time I've been bullied. Back at the orphanage, I read a lot and was very smart. But the other pups made fun of me for being smarter than them. So they used to make fun of me or hit me. Not as bad as this though. Rocky sighed as he thought back to the place he had known more than half his life. It was full of bad memories and he didn't like thinking about them. That wasn't nice of them, said Marshall, putting a paw on Rocky's shoulder. But you're not at the orphanage anymore. You're here in Paw Patrol with the rest of us. And we always look after each other, right? All right, muttered Rocky, blushing. Hey, Marshall? Not that I don't appreciate it, but why did you ask to stay behind? I felt you could use some company. Besides, I did hurt you after all, said Marshall, as he hopped off and wagged his tail. Do you want to do anything? Eat? Play a game? Rocky chuckled. I think I'm limited in what I can do, Marshall. He gentle waved his hurt leg and raised his ice pack of his eye a bit to show. I doubt I can even read. Thought Marshall, as he scratched his ears. He then gasped. What if I read to you? That way you can still enjoy the story. Rocky was a bit taken back by this, but smiled with joy. You really do that for me? Thanks. What are friends for? Now what book do you want? Asked Marshall. And thus the four musketeers held their swords over their heads and shouted, all for one and one for all. The end, read Marshall as he closed the book. Rocky barked his approval at Marshall's reading. The fire pup had played each role as best as he could, even doing a few imitation of the sword fights. If anything, it made the story even more interesting, and hearing it read to him was an experience he hadn't felt since the caretaker at the orphanage first read to him as a pup. It was one of the few good things he was fond of at that time, and it was that caretaker who inspired his love of reading. That was such a cool story. I really liked D'Artagnan. He was so brave, said Marshall, who jumped around. Hey! Maybe we should dress up like musketeers. You, me, Chase, and Rubble can be the four heroes. What about Zuma and Sky? Asked Rocky, amused by the idea. Well, I'm sure Zuma won't mind being Rochefort or Cardinal Richelieu, and we can have Sky be Milady de Winter, suggested Marshall. You do realize Sky will bite your ears off when she learns you want to make her a villain, chuckled Rocky. Well, that will only prove my point, laughed Marshall. The two pups continued to laugh until they heard the others arrive home and were greeted by them when they entered the medical room. We're back, and mission accomplished, said Chase, with a satisfied smirk. Rocky gasped upon seeing Ryder carrying his hat and cheered when it was placed back on his head. Thanks, guys. What happened to the bullies? Oh, they'll be tied up in my next for a while. Good thing I have plenty of extras, said Chase, with a snicker. Yeah, those three were begging and crying for us to let them down when we left them, laughed Sky. I already called Mayor Goodwill about them and she said they'll be sent to the pound for their actions, explained Ryder. Maybe a few months there will straighten them out. Good riddance is what I say, said Zuma, laughing until his stomach started growling. Can we have lunch, Ryder? Sure. Come on, pup, said Ryder as he turned to Rocky. I still need you to rest here for a few days, Rocky. I'll bring your dinner to you. Okay, said Rocky as he watched the other pups head out. He then cried out, Hey, Marshall. When the pup turned around, Rocky smiled and said, Thanks for being a good friend. No problem, said Marshall, before he turned around and accidentally bumped into the wall. Ow. I'm okay. Immediately, after the memory ended, Rocky burst into tears and jumped into Ryder's arms, where his owner hugged him. I totally forgot. How could I? Rocky buried his head into Ryder's chest, whimpering. I'm horrible. Rocky, it's okay. You made a mistake. I promise we'll find Marshall and we'll be back together as a family, assured Ryder. Rocky sniffed and nodded. Okay. You know, you're the reason he asked to be trained as our medical pup, said Ryder, smiling as Rocky looked up at him with surprise written on his face. He said he didn't want to see you or his other friends get hurt, so he worked extra hard to help you guys if you go injured. I never knew, whispered Rocky, shaking his head, but that's Marshall for you. Always wanting to help someone. I was wrong. We were all wrong. Marshall is our heart as a family. He's not a dope or annoyance or a klutz. He's our friend and so many of us depend on him, thought Rocky, wishing he could just see Marshall tripping and crashing into something. Anything to just get this guilt off his chest. Guys? Zuma here. There's a big storm heading towards Adventure Bay. It looks really bad, said Zuma from the pup pad. Ryder answered the call and forwards it to all Paw Patrol members. Thanks, Zuma. Everyone. we have to be careful. If this storm gets too big, we'll be in just as much danger as Marshall might be. Zuma, head back to shore and meet up with Rubble to check the rest of the nearby outskirts. Rocky and I will try to meet up with Chase and Sky. Ryder, sir, we should also call Everest and Jake. Just in case he's heading up the mountain, suggested Chase. Great idea, Chase. Over and out, said Ryder as he turned his pup pad to Everest's tag and pressed it. Everest appear on the screen with Jake right beside her. Hey, Ryder. What do you need? Asked Everest with a cheerful smile. Everest, we have a big problem. Marshall's run away and we can't find him, said Ryder. Both Everest and Jake gasped. Dude, that's terrible. Why did he run away? It's a long story, but we need your help in finding him. Can you check your mountain if he's there or on his way? Asked Ryder. We'll do our best, but Ryder, Everest started looking nervous. There is a big snowstorm coming, and combine that with the thunderstorm coming from your end, it's gonna make it very hard to find Marshall. Rocky and Ryder both looked at each other with grim expressions on their faces. Rocky decided to answer this time and said, Please help us, Everest. It's me and the other pup's fault that this happened. We want our friend back. We'll do our best. Over and out, cried Everest before they called out. Think we'll find Marshall before the storm starts? Asked Rocky. I hope so, Rocky, said Ryder as he looked towards the coming storm.
Your life.
His runaway journey. When Marshall started his runaway journey into Jake's Mountain, a lot of questions plagued his mind. Most of them were about the Paw Patrol and whether or not it was right to abandon his duties like that while also abandoning the people who depended on him. He also wondered if his friends really did hate him or was it just a heat of the moment. Plus, there were his parents. He could have gone to them easily or even asked Ryder to just go home, but he felt too ashamed to face his parents as a failure. But the biggest question that was on Marshall's mind at the moment was if he made a wrong turn somewhere. The mountain area he was traveling in was unfamiliar to him, and he had been on this mountain a lot in the past. Great, another thing I'm not good at. Following the stupid road. He turned to his left and saw the growing storm in the distance, which made his tail shiver. If he didn't find Jake soon, he was going to have to hold out against the storm. Maybe I call Ryder. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. It meant facing the consequences for his actions and his former friends, but Marshall knew it was smarter than ending up in the middle of the storm with no protection. Just as he was about to press his dog tag, he gasped upon seeing a family of bunnies hopping in his truck's way. Whoa! Look out! Turning the truck to the right, Marshall and his truck flew off the path and started going downhill. Sharp rocks scattered everywhere as Marshall bumped and jerked in his seat, doing his best not to get motion sick. He tried pressing the brakes, but the ridge was too steep. I like rocky road, but this is ridiculous. Marshall then gasped when he saw what the hill was leading him to, a deep cliff with a one-way ticket to puppy heaven. He tried pressing the brakes again, but they refused to budge. Marshall's scream echoed in the valley as the fire truck reached the edge and began to plummet to his doom. Without thinking, he cried out, "Arf! Ladder!" His ladder opened up from behind and Marshall turned around, jumping onto it as it continued to extend while he climbed up as fast as he could. When he reached the end, he jumped as high as he could and grabbed the ledge of the cliff, saving himself just in the nick of time. Grunting, he climbed up and lay on his back, panting over and over again. That was too close. Crash! Marshall's heart sank as he opened his eyes and carefully peered over the cliff. He whimpered upon seeing his prized fire truck smashed and on fire. Even worse was everything that he owned was down there. His food, clothing, gear. All Marshall had with him now was his collar. "I really did it this time," whispered Marshall, shaking his head. "How could this be any worse?" Just as soon as he said that, a crash of lightning echoed in the air as rain began to fall down on him. Of course. Like any pilot, Skye hated flying in rough weather. Still, she was a professional and wouldn't let herself get held back in her mission to find Marshall. Skye never told anyone, but she used to have a crush on Marshall when she first met him. That was until she thought they were better off as friends. Marshall was nice, but he wasn't boyfriend material for her. Although if her girl intuition was correct, she suspected Everest might have a thing for him. Instead, she decided to set her eyes on someone else. Skye sighed as she glanced down at the road below her. Chase, in his spy mobile, was focused on one thing, finding his best friend. Chase's expression told everyone that he was worried the most. The fact that he even completely dropped his professional attitude, screaming at himself while crying for his best friend, showed how much he really regretted his hateful words at Marshall. Not that Skye didn't regret her decision either. Especially after what Marshall did for her that one time against some trouble from her past. While the pups were free to do whatever they want, within reason, Sunday was patrol day. That was the day Ryder split the group into 3 teams of 2 to watch for any dangers or emergencies. However, due to a late-night rescue that required all of the Paw Patrol, except Skye and Marshall, only one group was out today. The rest had been given the option to sleep in, even Chase, who normally loved patrol day. And so, geared up in their pup packs, the duo headed out to do their weekly patrol. Skye actually tried to remember a time when she hung out on patrol with only Marshall, but couldn't recall. The only 2 pups she ever went out alone with was Chase, because of reasons. And Zuma, because she saw him as her kid brother, even if she was shorter than him. "So what do you want to do? Check out the farms? The beach? The playground?" asked Marshall, jumping up and down like a newborn pup, wagging his tail and panting. Skye chuckled at his adorableness. He was cute and nice, but Skye wanted somebody more mature. Someone like Chase. "Thinking about Chase again?" asked Marshall, surprising her and laughing when he saw her blush. She didn't know how him of all pups knew of her crush on their leader pup, but at least he didn't blab it out. "I don't know why you don't tell him. I'm sure he'll accept. But he doesn't seem to notice me like, a girl. I mean, he's always so serious about being a police dog that he'd probably be too focused on that to even, like me, answered Skye. Marshall snorted and did his best to hold his laughter in. "Oh, geez. What?" "Nothing," said Marshall, laughing out loud. "Nothing." He then stopped and tilted his head upon seeing something across the street. "Hey, what's that?" Skye turned across the street where there was an empty parking lot usually, only it had something that Skye hadn't seen in a long time. A series of pink and decorated trailers and moving can with the words "Dog Beauties of USA." She didn't know why they would be here of all places since Adventure Bay was a small town and not a city like LA or New York. Probably just here to rest before moving on. "Nothing," said Marshall, laughing out loud. "Nothing." He then stopped and tilted his head upon "Hey, didn't you used to be a model? Asked Marshall, asking Sky as they got closer. Sky sighed. Kinda. My entire family is in the dog modeling business. My sisters are huge stars in Europe, and my mom and dad were big back in their day. They're retired now. I used to do it, but I realized it wasn't for me. I wanted to get into flying. So what happened? Asked Marshall, sitting down. One day, I saw a small plane and got inside. I accidentally activated it, but I was able to control it. I spotted a fire in a building with a mother and her baby on the roof. I landed, got them to safety, and my exploits were reported on TV. Ryder soon contacted me and asked if I wanted to be part of Paw Patrol. Took me all day to convince my parents, but they let me go, explained Sky, thinking about that day was the day she felt alive for the first time in her life and could really do something. All the photo shots and dress-ups weren't that exciting to her. She felt like a doll, living a life she never wanted. Do you want to check it out? Maybe it has some of your old friends, said Marshall. Sky shook her head. Nah, I wasn't close to anyone. Let's just continue with Patrick Dash. Oh my gosh, Tina. Look who it is, shouted a snobby-sounding voice. Sky's eyes widened before she shut them down and cursed in her head. Oh no. Not them. Anyone but them. Slowly turning around, Sky saw a poodle with a fancy haircut and a diamond pink dress and a golden retriever with curled fur wearing a light blue dress with a tiara on her head. Suddenly, Sky felt like she was under a spotlight in a tight dress and couldn't breathe as everyone stared at her. Again. The two smirking dogs walked up to scare Sky and confused Marshall. Well, look what we have here. It's our old good pal Sky, said the poodle. You know them, Sky? Asked Marshall, but Sky only kept her head down low. Oh, we know her all right. I'm Tina, and this is BB. We used to be best friends. Isn't that right, Sky Cry? Teased the retriever. Sky turned away, biting her lip as she remembered that awful nickname. That name which took months to forget. Leave me alone. What was that, you little crybaby? Asked Tina. Growling, Sky screamed, I said leave me alone. And don't call me that. I'm not a little scarred pup anymore. The two fashion dogs laughed and shook their heads before turning to Marshall. Has Sky never tell you how bad she was as a model? How she always posed wrong, or knocked over stage equipment. Let's not forget that time she fell off the stage once, hurt her knee, and cried. Only because you pushed me. You always were bullying me around, shouted Sky, looking ready to rush at them. You can't prove anything, said BB, before looking at Sky's clothes and rearing back in disgust. Ugh, and I see your sense of style has only gotten worse. Look at what you're wearing. This is my wing gear. I'm a member of Paw Patrol. A rescue pup. I do far more good in the world than you two fufus ever do, countered Sky. Oh, please. You in Paw Patrol? I bet you're just their servant or something. There is no way they would take crybaby like you, Sky Cry, said Tina. Sky was about to say something, but Marshall growled first. You're wrong. Sky is our friend, and she's one of the best flyers I've ever seen. Standing in front of her like a knight, he continued, Sky has saved so many people with her flying skills that we couldn't do half of our rescues without her. She's brave, smart, graceful, talented, and fun to hang out with. A lot less than I could say for you two uglies. The insulted dogs gasped and growled. Watch it, Fire Boy. We happen to be the top 2 models of our industry. Then the industry stinks if it thinks you two are beautiful. Sky has a beautiful spirit, and that's more important than any makeup, dress, or jewelry you wear, shouted Marshall. Marshall, thought Sky, who felt her heart skip. She never had anyone ever stand up to her like that. What are you? Her boyfriend, asked BB. No, but I am her friend. And as her friend, I feel inclined to do this. Marshall smirked before saying, "Arf. Water cannon." Sky watched as Marshall's water cannon came out of his pup pack and sprayed her two bullies with ice-cold water. The two screamed in fury and despair as the water ruined their perfect appearances. They ran away, calling for assistance while crying like babies. Sky and Marshall laughed as they saw the whole thing, the former wishing she had a camera to record this and put it online. It would be the perfect revenge against those two for everything they had done to her, but this was enough for now. "That was so awesome," shouted Sky as she rushed over and licked a blushing Marshall. "Thanks for standing up for me." "What are friends for?" replied Marshall, putting his water cannon away. "Let's continue with the patrol, shall we?" "Let's," answered Sky as they continued down the street, an extra skip in her walk. Marshall had helped her deal with her old bullies, and she repaid him by bullying him back with the others. She felt unworthy of being his friend and swore she would do everything she could to bring her friend home. She glanced down where she saw Chase and found him stopping in the middle of the road. Pressing her communicator tag, she called Chase. "Did you find something?" "Yeah, I found a bunch of tracks." "It smells like Marshall's truck," said Chase on the other line. "Really? That's great," shouted Sky as hope began to fill in her chest. She quickly contacted Ryder. "Ryder, we found tracks of Marshall's fire truck." "Great work, pups. We'll try to head up to your location, but this storm is getting pretty rough," said Ryder. "Hang tight until we get there." "But Ryder, we need to find Marshall. He could be miles ahead. Any time we wait will waste any chance of finding him," shouted Chase. "And what happens if you get lost in the storm as well? It's best if we do this together." "Can I at least use my drone? That way I can stay on the search and still stay put," suggested Chase. Deciding to support Chase, Sky quickly said, "I'll be with him at all time, Ryder. Don't worry." "Alright, just be careful." Ryder out. "Good luck, Chase," said Ryder. Super Spy Chase is on the case. Drone. As Sky came down for a landing, she saw the drone shoot out and fly in the direction of the tracks landing down. She rushed over to Chase, being mindful of the rain, and saw him concentrate on the drone screen. She didn't say anything as Chase concentrated, but she could see the worry in his eyes. "Come on, Marshall. You have to be somewhere," muttered Chase. "I have to find him. Have to find him." "Chase," said Sky, putting a paw on his shoulder. "We will find him. I promise." Chase nodded in thanks as he went back to his drone screen. Marshall normally liked being wet, but not this kind. After a grueling climb, the poor pup was forced to brave the mountain through the harsh storm. He was almost at Jake's Mountain by the site of the winter frost back just a few miles away. Still, he needed a place to rest and wait for the storm to calm down. He had tried contacting for help, but his tag was damaged from the fall he took. Even if he wanted to call for help, which he did, he couldn't. Teeth chattering, Marshall braved his way through the rain and cold winds, hoping the lighting didn't hit him as he made his way further up the mountain. Need to find some place to rest. He then noticed something nearby and gasped with joy. A cave. It was big and looked to be very deep. Putting extra energy into his legs, Marshall made into the cave and sighed in relief upon feeling the rain stop hitting his fur. Shaking the water off, Marshall walked in a bit deeper, but made sure not to go too far since it was completely dark and he had no flashlight. "It's really big. I wonder if this was used by somebody at one time," said Marshall as he sat down and yawned. "I'm beat." The events of the day were finally hitting Marshall as he felt his sore body start to shiver again and his stomach growl. He had no food. No clothing to keep him warm. And he was alone. Alone. Marshall had never been alone before until now. He always had his friends or family with him. but never just himself. When he was with his friends, he always felt warm, safe, and happy. Now that he was alone, it was cold, dark, and scary. I don't like being alone, muttered Marshall, closing his eyes and sobbing. I want my mom and dad. I want Ryder. And I want my friends. I want them so much. I want to go home. He didn't care if the pups hated him or he was a klutz. He wanted to be back home, curled up with his best friends by the fire. He wanted Ryder to give him his teddy bear. He wanted Chase to lay beside him and keep him warm like all the other times he had gotten cold and lonely. He tired hitting his collar again. Ryder? Chase? Anyone? Please, find me. I need help. I want to go home. Please. He cried again, just as the roar of thunder echoed. Or at least, he thought it was thunder. Marshall heard a growing growling noise as he looked up and saw, standing on its 2 feet, was a giant, angry, black bear. Marshall felt his entire body freeze up as it raised its sharp claw. A second later, it came down upon him.
Jo Leute, dann haben wir
Was about to knock. Marshall's brain finally kicked in just as the bear's claw was about to knock his face off. He quickly ducked and rushed forward, straight between the bear's legs. Marshall didn't dare stop running until he found himself smacked face first with the wall. I'm okay, he said before hearing the roar of the bear again. It was coming straight for him and Marshall didn't know what to do. Spotting a few rocks, he grabbed them with his mouth, lifted them in the air, and turned around before kicking them straight at the bear. A few made a direct hit the bear's face, including the eyes, which forced it to shut them, but it didn't stop him. Gasping, Marshall rolled out of the way just as the bear smashed head first into the wall, causing its nose to bleed. Marshall himself ended up scratching his back over a few pointy rocks, breaking his skin and drawing blood. He didn't even notice his collar getting loose and falling off. He hissed, but now wasn't the time to reflect on his pain. He had to get out of the cave and fast. The problem was still the bear. It was now swiping its paws everywhere and made it difficult to get out of the cave. Any minute it was going to open its eyes and eat him for dinner. Marshall tried to think of a way to get out of this, thinking back to what Ryder taught him about bears during their trips into the woods. If you see a bear, you punch it in the nose? No, that's sharks. Climb a tree? But there are no trees. Play dead? His eyes widened. Play dead. That's it. Good thing I happen to be the best paw patroller at that trick. Grasping his chest, Marshall let out a few gags and coughs. Ugh. You got me. Cave spinning. Vision is getting dark. Feel so cold. Marshall gave out one last cry before spinning round and landing on his back, all fours laid out in the air. He even lopped out his tongue for good measure. The bear finally stopped and stared at the deceased pup that was in his cave. He walked over, sniffed Marshall a few times before grunting and turning away. The bear, in turn, saw the shiny red collar and grabbed it while heading deeper into his cave to examine it. Marshall, opening one of his eyes, saw the bear preoccupied, and slowly got up. He tiptoed as best as he could towards the entrance, but a loose rock he hit alerted the bear. Marshall quickly fell on his stomach, eyes closed, and rump raised while trying to act as limp as possible. The bear raised an eyebrow before shrugging and getting back to focusing on its new toy. Sweating the sweat off his brow with his ear, Marshall got up and quietly walked till he was outside of the cave, but then lightning flashed and he yelped. Realizing his mistake, Marshall got back on his back and held his paws on his chest, lying as straight as possible. The bear, now curious again, walked up to Marshall and started sniffing him again. This time, however, Marshall felt a sneeze coming and did his best to continue holding it in and play dead. Or else he was dead for real. But it was too much, and before Marshall knew it, he sneezed in front of the bear's face. His snot entered the beast's eyes, and it roared in fury before striking its paw. Marshall tried to move, but a painful cry echoed in the cave as it slashed his side. Still, Marshall pressed out of the cave, running as fast as his adrenaline could push him while ignoring the open gash in his side. The rain was coming down hard. The rain was coming down harder. Sky had convinced Chase to move his vehicle under a tree, saying that 3 seconds of not watching the drone wasn't going to be life or death. With the protectiveness of the trees covering them, Sky shook herself dry and warmed herself up with a blanket Chase had in his trunk. She watched him continue to stare at the screen, controlling the drone with a look of pure concentration. She only hoped that Marshall was keeping himself warm and dry in this weather. Marshall may have been silly and a klutz, but he knew when to be serious. And a storm like this is much too serious. Sky wasn't the only one thinking this, as a call from Ryder soon alerted both of them. Guys, the storm is getting too rough. We have to head back to the lookout. We're not done yet, Ryder, sir. Marshall is out here. I can feel it, shouted Chase. Chase, I know you're worried about him, but this storm is getting worse and I don't want to have 2 more pups missing. Come back to base, that's an order. Sky turned to Chase, who looked to be torn on what to do. Chase had always followed Ryder's orders and disapproved of anyone else questioning their leader. He was a by-the-book guy in everything from missions to games. And now his heart was torn between to do what he wanted and obeying his orders. Closing his eyes, Chase muttered, Ryder, sir? With all due respect, I cannot obey that order. Chase out. Chase, wait, cried out a Ryder's voice before Chase silenced him, turning off his communicator tag. He turned to Sky and said, you should get going. Don't want Ryder to be angry at you too. Sky shook her head, her mind already made up. No, I'm staying with you, Chase. I want to find Marshall too. Chase nodded before sighing and getting back to his screen. Ryder's going to scold me when I get back, but I don't care. I'm not letting Marshall out of my sights. I'll chase him round the world if I have to. He's really that important to you, huh? Asked Sky, walking over to his side. Chase's expressions softened as a smile stretched across his muzzle. He was my first pup friend. I didn't have any back when I was little. My dad, Ryder, and his dad were all I had until I met him. Chase didn't know why his dad wanted him to meet this dog family, even if they were old friends. It wasn't that he was scared. Not Chase. He was just unsure. He never bothered making friends with other pups because of how big they were or how weird it felt being with other dogs. Especially since most of them had 2 parents while he only had 1. Not that his dad wasn't great. He was the best police dog in all of Adventure Bay. Even in his old city, before he moved and met his mom, he was famous. To Chase, his father was everything in his world. How he acted, what he said, what he believed in. All of it Chase absorbed like a sponge. Plus, he had friends. Human friends like Ryder and his brilliant dad. They were his family, even if they were different species, and Ryder had been there for him ever since he was born. He didn't feel there was any reason for him to meet his family, especially their son. The only reason he was not pushing the issue was because one of them was his dad's old teammates from his day as a rescue rover, the first multi-dog rescue team that Ryder's dad once led. While the old team split up and went their own separate ways, his dad and the Dalmatian that was coming had stayed close over the years. Everyone else had drifted away. Chase watched as his father licked the last of his fur on his head, claiming he was satisfied with the grooming. Ugh, do you have to do that, Dad? It's embarrassing. A much larger German shepherd with deep green eyes and a small scratch on his cheek chuckled. Sorry, Chase. Can't have you scaring our guests away with your ugly bed head. Now you remembered to put all your toys away, right? Chase walked over to the entrance of the lookout and tried to find any he missed. Yup. Got them all, Dad. His dad gave him a proud smile before both of them heard the sound of a car honking. That must be them right now. I'll go get the professor and Ryder. His father left the room to head upstairs while Chase gulped upon the thought of having guests in their home. They rarely ever got any, but there was a first time for everything, huh? He walked outside and saw a huge fire truck coming into their parking lot. Chase wagged his tail and barked as the red engine blew its horn. 2 adult Dalmatians, one male with small spots and a female with fluffy big spots, jumped down from the top of the trunk. A group of firefighters all waved at the two before the fire truck took off. The 2 adults turned towards Chase and gave him a warm smile. You must be Chase, right? Trigger's son? Ugh, yes sir, said Chase, standing tall and trying his best to look proper. The female chuckled. Yup, it's his son all right. I'm Misty, and this is my husband, Blaze. Nice to meet you, Chase. Your dad said you were a clear cardboard version of him and he wasn't kidding. Except your eyes. You got your mother's eyes, said Blaze, walking over and rubbing his paw over Chase's head. Ignoring the head rubbing, Chase leaned forward eagerly upon hearing the last part. Did you know her, sir? Your father and I met her when we had to respond to an emergency with our team in this town. He fell in love with her at first sight. After the team split up, he decided to come back here and woo her over. Rest is history as they say, explained Blaze. He then looked around, trying to find something. Honey? Where's Marshall? He was with us when we got dropped off, said Misty, looking around. Figuring that Marshall was their pup, Chase was about to suggest searching the area when a voice cried out, "Look out!" Chase turned around only to have his eyes widen at the sight of a Dalmatian pup around his size, trying to ride a skateboard, while heading right towards him. Chase was knocked back as both pups sailed into the air. Chase landed on his back, but that was nothing compared to the Dalmatian pup landing on top of him. The two groaned before the other pup shook his head and smiled. Sorry about that. I'm Marshall. Chase. Could you please get off of me? Asked the German Shepherd pup. Sorry, said Marshall, getting off as the 2 adult Dalmatians chuckled. He looked up at the lookout and gasped. Wow. This is where you live? You must be the coolest pup ever. Thanks, said Chase, blushing. He then noticed the skateboard. Hey, where did you find that? I thought I put that away. Oh, it was right by that tree over there. I was gonna carry it over, but I slipped and fell before I ended up riding it. It was really fun, explained Marshall with a bounce. Looks like someone forgot to clean up their toys, said Trigger as he walked over, Ryder and his dad beside him. Ryder's dad was very similar to his son in both facial features and hairstyle, with one main difference. He looked not only more mature, but also had a beard and glasses while wearing a lab coat. Chase whimpered at the thought of displeasing his father, but to his relief he got nuzzled instead. Relax, Chase. It was a silly mistake, but a harmless one. Plus, I think Marshall here enjoyed playing around with it. Hi, Mr. Trigger. It's an honor to meet another member of Dad's Rescue Rover team, said Marshall, wagging his tail. And you are just as much the bundle of energy your mother complains about, chuckled Trigger, making Marshall blush. He turned to the other Dalmatians, and his smile grew as he hugged them as if they were family. It's good to see you, Misty. You too, hothead. Still never gonna let go of that nickname, huh? Teased Blaze as he slapped paws with his old teammate. Old habits die hard, answered Trigger. Good to see you again, Blaze. The years have been kind to you, said Ryder's dad. Thanks, Professor. Wish the whole team was here. Shame we're all so far away now, said Blaze, with a sigh. He turned to Ryder and smiled. Well, if it isn't little Ryder. All grown up. Last time I saw you were only about as tall as I was. Good to see you again, Blaze. Wanna come on in? We got snacks already lined up, said Ryder. Snacks? Oh, boy. I'm hungry, shouted Marshall, zipping over upon Ryder, ending his sentence. Chase's own stomach growled as he let out a chuckle. I'm hungry too. Grown up. Last time I saw you were only about as tall as I was. Chase's own stomach growled as he let out a chuckle. I'm hungry too. Grown up. Last time I saw you were only about as tall as I was. With that said, the group headed inside to enjoy eating and talk about old times. Naturally, while listening to their parents talk about the good old days was fun sometimes, a pup could only be entertained for so long. So when Ryder asked if he could go out and play with Chase and Marshall, the two pups eagerly begged to do so. After getting a yes, the two went out and played ball. Watch out, Chase. This one's coming to you, shouted Ryder as he threw the ball high into the air. I got it, shouted Chase as he headed towards a tree, leaped up, bounced off it, and grabbed the ball in the air. He rushed back to Ryder, placed the ball next to him, and barked. Good boy, Chase, said Ryder, scratching Chase by the ear, much to the pup's enjoyment. Pass it to me, Ryder, shouted Marshall, jumping up and down. Okay. Go long, Marshall, cried out Ryder as he threw it to the Dalmatian pup. Here I go, shouted Marshall, rushing out to get the ball. However, he didn't notice where he was looking as both Chase and Ryder saw him heading for the professor's parked truck. Marshall. Look out, shouted Chase. Huh? OOF, cried out Marshall, as he hit the truck and fell on his back. Eyes rolling, he muttered, did anybody get the license plate of that truck? When he shook his head, he saw it in front of him and read, XY34-9 NAE. There we go. The ball, meanwhile, had bounced into the bushes nearby. I got it, shouted Chase as he ran over to the bushes. Emerging from them, he found the ball nearby and was about to grab it when his nose picked up something. He sniffed the ground, and before he knew it, he sneezed. Achoo. Sniffing, he looked around. Is there a cat here? Curious, he decided to follow the scent. Before long he came to a nearby tree and heard a meow. He looked up and to his surprise there was a scared light purple kitty with a collar. Oh no. That kitty is stuck up there. He turned around and started barking as loud as he could for help. Hey! Over here! Ryder! Before long, Ryder and Marshall rushed over with worried expressions. What's wrong, Chase? Look, there is a kitty up in that tree, said Chase, pointing upwards. How are we going to get her down? Asked Ryder. Wait. I got an idea, said Marshall, running away. Chase decided to keep a focus on the kitty for now. Easy there, little kitty. We'll get you down. A few seconds later, Marshall came back with an old ladder in his mouth. Spitting it out, Marshall said, "I remembered seeing his in the garage. We can use his to rescue the kitty." "Great idea, Marshall. I'll hold the ladder while you climb up," said Ryder as he positioned it above the tree. It was just barely long enough to reach the branch. Marshall jumped onto the ladder and slowly began to climb up. "You sure you'll be okay, Marshall?" asked Chase. "I will. I've been doing this since I was 2, said Marshall as he slowly climbed up the ladder. He reached the top where the kitty was hissing at him. "Whoa, there. Let's get you down so we can get you back to your owner," reassured Marshall. The kitty looked hesitant, but soon jumped onto Marshall's face, nearly causing him to all. "Ah. I can't see. I can't see. Marshall, hold on. You don't want to lose your balance," said Ryder, which made Marshall hug the ladder. I'm scared. I can't see anything," whimpered Marshall. "Hold on, Marshall. I'm coming," said Chase as he got up the ladder and started climbing. He gently grabbed Marshall's tail. "Now slowly come down as I drag you, okay?" Marshall nodded, the kitty wobbling on his head, as Chase slowly guided him down the ladder until they were at the end. The kitty jumped off Marshall's head, much to his relief, and into Ryder's arms as the 2 pups landed on the grass. "It's okay, he looked at the collar, Callie. You're safe now." "What's all the commotion?" asked Ryder's dad as he and the other dogs came over to investigate. Marshall, jumping up and about, rushed over to his parents. "Mom. Dad. We just saved that kitty from that tree. All 3 of us. We were like one big rescue squad like you were back in the day, Dad." "Is this true, Chase?" asked Trigger, turning to his son. Yes, sir," answered the pup, nervously. Smiling, Trigger walked over and patted his son on the shoulder. "Look like you got your old man spirit, huh? I'm proud of you, Chase." "Really?" asked Chase with a big smile, before he realized how he acted and straightened his position. I mean, just doing the right thing, sir." "And we're proud of you too, son," said Misty, nuzzling her own boy. "You boys sure made a good team with Ryder here. Maybe someday you'll have your own rescue rovers in the future, huh?" teased Blaze. "That would be cool." "Hey, Chase, you want to be rescue pups when we get older?" asked Marshall. "I'd really like to do it with my best friend at my side." "Be best friend?" asked Chase with wide eyes. "I'm your best friend?" "Yeah, you don't want to be?" asked Marshall, looking a bit hurt. "And no. I want to." "You're my best friend too, Marshall," shouted Chase with a smile. The 2 pups laughed and hugged each other before following their parents back to the look to call the owner of the cat. Sky couldn't help but laugh. "Callie was your first rescue, huh? I guess it shouldn't come to a surprise since we rescue her so many times." "Yeah," chuckled Chase. "Marshall and I grew closer as we met more and more. Our dads didn't want to lose touch with each other like they had with the other members of Rescue Rover, so we saw each other almost every week. I think that day was also the day Ryder decided he wanted to form Paw Patrol with me and Marshall as the founding pups. Of course, we didn't really start getting into rescues until you and Rocky joined." "Whatever happened to the rest of the Rescue Rovers?" "Besides your dad and Marshall's dad, I never really hear much about them," asked Sky. "The rest just fell out of touch. Never were seen again. It's one of the things Ryder wanted to do differently with Paw Patrol. Start it when we were pups so our bonds as friends could last longer. Most of the Rescue Rovers were adults when they started, but our dads were teens. That's why they bonded easier." Chase bit his lip and turned back to his drone screen. "I didn't want that to happen to our team." That's why I'm so upset at myself for what I did to Marshall. Not only because he's my friend, but also because I want us to be friends forever. All of us. Sky looked at Chase with a warm smile. He acts tough all the time, but suddenly Chase's expression turned to one of horror as he slowly began to lose all color in his face. Oh no. Sky looked at the screen and soon shared a similar expression. The drone had found Marshall's fire truck, smashed, burning, and no sign of Marshall. That was safe. By the time Marshall finally found a cave up in the frosty mountains that was safe and bear-free, he was on his last legs. Exhaustion and pain had finally kicked in when he first touched the snow, and the large gash he had gotten earlier didn't help. He had done his best to clean it with his tongue, but without proper first aid he wasn't going to last much longer. Lying in the cold, icy floor of the cave, Marshall did his best to get warm by huddling his body into a fetal position. His whimpers echoed among the cave as he lay there hurt, cold, and tired. He had no way of getting out of here, especially with the snowstorm that was outside. It would take all day to get to Jake's without his truck, and he doubted he could survive out there without a way to properly heal himself and stay warm. And worst of all, he had no means of contacting Ryder or the others for help. Even if they were searching for him, they had no way of finding him. He left no clues of where he was going. There was no more denying the one thought in Marshall's mind that made him more scared than he ever had in his entire life. I'm going to die. Frozen tears began to stream down his face as he thought of his upcoming demise. He didn't want to die, but what other option was there? He was going to either starve, freeze, or bleed out. Only a miracle could save him, and with the day Marshall had he doubted any miracles were going to be coming for him. No, it was best to make peace with what time he had left and get ready for his end. I'm going to miss everyone. I'm so sorry, Mom and Dad. I love you. I love you both so much. Ryder, I just wish I could tell you how much you meant to me as an owner and a friend. Rocky, Zuma, Rubble, Sky. All of you were the best friends I ever had. I'm sorry for all the mistakes I made, including this one. Forgive me. And Chase. Chase. His mind drifted back to a single day where he showed his dedication to his best friend. He flashed back to 2 pups in a graveyard. A promise between 2 young boys who became brothers in that very moment. I'm sorry, I couldn't keep my promise, Chase, thought Marshall as he felt his eyelids grow heavier and heavier. With his vision going darker and darker, he saw a bright figure heading towards him from the edge of the cave. It was tall, and looked to be stretching out its arms. An angel? Come to take me away to puppy heaven? Marshall closed his eyes and accepted his fate as he was lifted from the cold, dark earth and carried into the air. He felt warmth wrap around him as a smile decorated his face. His suffering had finally ended. Chase drove his car like hell itself was behind him. He was sure Sky was telling him to slow down, arguing he was going at dangerous speeds. He didn't care to listen to her or focus on anything else. All he cared about was getting to that crash site and finding Marshall alive or any hint of where he was. He wasn't dead. He refused to believe he was dead. Marshall promised to him that he wouldn't die and put Chase through that feeling of misery and loss again. He knew how much that promise meant to them both, and all he could think about was the day when that promise was made. Aim. Fire. 21 guns fired into the air as taps were played by the trumpeter. Police squads of over a dozen districts, including the small one in Adventure Bay, saluted as the officers slowly took the American flag off of the closed casket. Chase wanted more than anything for them to open it again so he could look at his father one last time, even if it was the stiff image of his face that would never again open its eyes. The flag was folded as 21 other police dogs all held in mourning for their fallen brother. Everyone had told Chase over and over again, his father died a hero, protecting an innocent from a bank robber's gun. Chase didn't want a hero. He wanted his dad back. He was still denying it, even in his heart. His dad was immortal in his eyes. He wasn't supposed to die. Heroes never die, they come back after the day is saved. Always. Dressed in his black tux, he felt his entire body go numb as his father's human partner walked over with the flag in his hands and presented it to Chase. He stared at it for at least a minute, unable to even lift his paws or stop his eyes from crying. Ryder's dad eventually took it and placed it next to Chase, who watched the casket sink lower and lower into the ground until there was a thud. That was it. His father was gone just like his mother. He was alone. At that moment, Chase ran as fast as he could through the cemetery. He ignored the calls of Ryder and everyone out there as they called out his name. He didn't want to listen to them, saying that things would get better. It would never get better. How could it when the last of his parents were dead? Losing his mother was hard, but she died when he was only a few weeks old. All he could remember of her was just the summer smell of her fur. His father had been the only parent in his entire life and now he lost him. Blinded by tears and grief, Chase found himself slipping on a loose root and fell into a pile of mud. He didn't bother getting up, he just lay there and began crying his eyes. He wished he could sink into the earth itself and join his father in eternal sleep. If only to end this pain in his heart. Daddy. Chase whispered as he closed his eyes, haunted by the peaceful face of his now deceased father. Chase didn't know how long he lay there in the mud, but time meant nothing to him at the moment. The sun was setting, he could tell that much. If anything, he didn't mind just resting here forever. Someone will come looking for me. Maybe bring me back to the lookout. Chase didn't want to go back. Not when so many memories of his father were there. Of course, that begged the question of what he was going to do now. Chase? Hey, Chase, shouted a voice in the twilight. Marshall? Thought Chase, ears perking up. He slowly got up from the mud, his clothes a complete wreck, as he saw his best friend emerge from the bushes. Panting like he had been in a 3-hour marathon, Marshall took a moment to gather his breath before he turned to Chase with a relieved smile. There you are. Everyone's been worried, shouted Marshall as he rushed over and hugged Chase. Despite Chase not hugging back, Marshall nuzzled his best friend. Come on, let's head back. Plus, I think my parents are gonna scold me for running off like that to look for you. Leave me alone, Marshall, hissed Chase as he turned around. I'm not going back. I want to be alone. Marshall whimpered as he stared at his best friend's back. Chase. He lowered his head. I'm sorry you lost your dad. I liked him a lot, we all did. My parents, Ryder, Mr. Ryder, all of those police units there. They loved your dad too, and he was an inspiration to all of them. I understand that, Dash. Understand, shouted Chase as he tackled Marshall, pinning him to the ground. You don't understand anything about how I'm feeling, Marshall. You still have a family. My dad was my entire family. With him gone I'm all alone. Chase leaked a few tears before returning to his rage. I never knew my mom. She died soon after I was born. Dad's always been there for me, and I wanted him to watch me grow up like a police dog, but he can't because some trigger-happy bank robber killed him. Who do I have left, Marshall? Who? You have me, shouted Marshall, pushing him off, much to Chase's surprise. Getting up, Marshall barked before shouting, Darn it, Chase. You still have family who loves you. Maybe we're not related by blood, but... His expression softened as his eyes began to get misty. You are a brother to me, Chase. And I love you like one. Chase's eye widened as his mouth dropped upon hearing this. And Marshall. Rubbing his eyes, Marshall continued, I hate seeing you like this, Chase. I want to help you because your pain is my pain. I may not have been Trigger's son, but he was an uncle to me. We're all hurt by his death, Chase. Maybe it's different from your pain, but we still are sad. He walked over and hugged his stunned best friend. Do you know what puppy heaven is? And no. Whispered Chase, although he had heard of it. It's a place where good dogs go when they die. A place of peace and eternal happiness. Your parents are there, happy, and they are looking down at you right now. Watching you, always, said Marshall as he gave Chase a small smile. I had a grandmother who died before I met you, and when she was gone I was sad too. My mother told me that all of us will see her again when we go to puppy heaven, but we have to wait for it to come. We have to live good and happy lives because that's what they would want us to do. They do? Asked Chase, tearing up at this point. But I miss them so much. How can I move on? By moving on with us together, Chase. If you let us, whispered Marshall. Chase fell on his rump and started to rub his eyes. Do you really want to be my brother? Only if you let me, replied Marshall. Chase thought long and hard about it before he nodded. Okay, but I want you to promise me one thing. Anything, said Marshall, wagging his tail. Don't die before I do. Marshall looked a bit taken back, but Chase continued. I don't care what it takes, but I don't want you to die before I die. I can't go through another loss, Marshall. Please. Marshall was silent for a bit before he smiled. I promise. Cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. Wait, should that be hope not to die in this case? Chase chuckled as a real smile, the first in many days, appeared on his face. Yeah, it would. The two looked at each as they held their paw out and touched each other. Brothers? Asked Chase.
Brothers.
By the time Chase reached the wreck, the fire was all but gone thanks to the ongoing rain. He leaped out of his seat and began barking over and over again. Marshall! Marshall! Shouted Chase as he ran around the area, trying to find even a fur of the spotted Dalmatian. Every time he turned his head, he grew afraid that he would see a dead body somewhere on the ground. He sniffed the air, trying to get a scent of Marshall, but he could barely get anything. The fire had to have burned it away. Thankfully, he didn't smell a decaying corpse. Chase, shouted Sky's voice as he saw her land nearby on her helicopter. She rushed out, looking both furious and worried. What the heck is wrong with you? You could have gotten yourself killed the way you were driving. I was trying to find Marshall, shouted Chase, defending his actions. Look around you, Chase. Marshall is. Sky began to choke on her words while getting ready to tear up. He's not dead, shouted Chase so loud that even the thunder above was muted by his scream. Marshall is not dead. He wouldn't break his promise. Never. Nostrils flaring, he saw that Sky looked at him with fear and was shivering. Sense came back to him as he shook his head and looked away in shame. I'm sorry, Sky, but he can't be dead. There is no body. No smell of death. And look at the way the truck has crashed, it had to have come from above. Sky did indeed look at the truck, which had landed front first into the earth. Looking up, she saw a cliff right above it. Arf. Wings. Her jetpack opened up from her pup pack and she flew up towards the cliff. Chase watched her fly up as he cursed himself for yelling at her. His father told him the most important thing for a police dog was to remain calm and professional at all times. And I haven't done a very good job of that, have I? Chase felt exhaustion slowly overcome him. Everything that had happened in the last few hours was slowly breaking him, and he didn't know how much more he could take. But I have to keep going. I have to find Marshall. He had to find Marshall, apologize to him, knock him on the head for leaving, and then hug him and say how much he loved his brother. Chase. I found paw tracks. Marshall must have jumped out of his truck before it crashed, shouted Sky's voice on his communicator tag. At that moment, Sky's voice was like that of an angel of hope. Chase barked and replied, Great work, Sky. I'll be up there in a moment. He turned to his pup pack. Rough. Zipline. The compartment for his zipline opened up and he shot it at the cliff before using it to bring him up. Reaching the top, Chase carefully climbed up until he reached the road where Sky was waiting for him. He saw the tracks and sighed with relief. He's alive, Sky. He's alive. Sky smiled and nodded. Then let's keep looking. Wait, said Chase, making her pause and look at him. Nervously, he rubbed the back of his neck with his paw. I'm sorry, I yelled at you. It was wrong. Sky gave a small smile before walking over to Chase and nuzzling him. It's okay. You're worried about Marshall. We'll find him, Chase. Chase blushed a bit, but soon reminded himself he was on a mission. Now was not the time to be thinking of such thoughts. He lowered himself to the ground and began to use his nose to follow the scent Marshall's tracks had left. He found himself making for a nearby cave not too far from where they landed. It was dark and very deep, the kind of caves he and Jake sometimes liked to explore on occasion. Rough. Flashlight. His compartment opened and his tool instantly flashed a beam of light into the cave where it fell upon something. Upon seeing what it was, both pups froze at the sight of a large bear, but upon seeing what was in its mouth, Sky screamed. It was Marshall's tag. Bloody and chewed up. The bear roared in fury. Before Chase knew it, he was screaming and charged forward. If it For the first time in his life, Rocky didn't care about getting wet. Not if it meant finding Marshall. I'd even let him spray me with his water cannons every day if it means seeing him again. When the storm was too much for any of them to handle, Ryder had ordered all pups back to the lookout, much to their disagreement. They all wanted to find Marshall, especially in this storm. Nevertheless, he gave an order and they obeyed. It had shocked them all when Chase told Ryder to pretty much forget it and took off on his own. The very same Chase that always drilled them every day into obeying Ryder's every command. Now they had both Marshall, Chase, and even Sky to worry about. As it appeared, she decided to follow him. Rocky wondered if she did it because she wanted to find Marshall, or because of her feelings for the police pup. Everyone in Adventure Bay knew that Chase and Sky had a thing for each other, but neither of them had the courage to admit it. Still, if there were any two pups who could find Marshall, it was them. The rest could only wait for their return. Zuma constantly paced around the living room while Rubble was focused on the driveway outside, hoping to see or hear a car coming. Rocky had learned the value of patience early at a young age, but he was finding it hard to not just grab his truck and continue the search, even if meant getting wet. "Waki?" asked Zuma, looking at him with worry. Rocky did his best to smile at the pup. A long time ago, that speech of his annoyed him a bit since he couldn't say his name right. Over time he grew used to it and saw Zuma as the little brother of the team next to Rubble. Do you think Marshall hates us?" The idea of Marshall and the word hate never once crossed Rocky's mind except for maybe flying. But with the fight earlier in the day playing in his head, he couldn't lie and think that there was some truth in Zuma's question. "I don't know." "I don't blame him," whispered Rubble, looking away from the window. "We said such horrible things to him. Over a stupid show. I don't care how long it takes. I'll make it up to him, I promise," cried out Zuma, rubbing his eyes. "I just want our family back." Rocky walked over and hugged his friend, who began to cry on his shoulders. "I'm sure Chase and Sky will bring him back. Everything will be okay." At least, Rocky hoped so. He couldn't help but get a bad feeling in his chest that something bad had happened. Chase's war cry echoed across the cave like a demon unleashing its rage. From the entrance, Sky saw her friend ran towards the bear with bloodlust in his eyes. She knew what it was all about. She had seen the bloody collar and, with it, began to paint the image of an eaten-up corpse. Doing her best to avoid the bile growing in her mouth, she saw Chase slide underneath the charging bear. Turning around, he barked and jumped, biting the bear in the tail. The beast howled with pain as it tried to shake Chase off, but he refused to let go. Using his paws, he pushed himself onto the back and started biting as hard as he could at the neck, his German shepherd's teeth ripping fur and flesh out. Sky didn't know what was scarier, the bear or Chase. She had seen Chase act violent before, mostly against the occasional thief or bully they had to deal with. But this was the first time Chase looked like he was fully willing to kill. Still frozen, Sky watched in horror as the bear finally got wise and made for the wall of his cave. Turning around, he slammed his back against the rocky surface. Chase cried out in pain before slipping down, dazed and bleeding around his ears. Seeing his attacker down, the bear got up and opened its jaws. "Chase," shouted Ski, before turning to her pup pack. She may have lost one friend, but she wasn't about to lose another. Arf. Arf. Wings. Once her wings came out, Sky flew as fast as she could towards the bear. Normally, she wouldn't dare attempt to do this in such a narrow space as a cave, but it was better than losing two pups in one day. The bear's attention was caught as Sky began to zip around the bear, barking at it. It roared and tried to swipe at her with his claws, but she was much too nimble for it. Getting an idea, she headed towards the exit of the cave while shouting, "Come and get me, you overgrown teddy bear." The bear roared in anger and chased after her, reaching the edge of the cliff path that led to a long way down. Sky took to the air even higher as the bear continued to roar at her. "Hey!" shouted a voice, catching the bear's attention. It turned around and saw Chase, back on his four paws, growling at the bear. "Bark. Net." His net launcher emerged from the pup pack and fired, the net wrapping around the muzzle and face of the bear. Blinded and unable to roar, It leaned on its hind legs in confusion while swiping in the air. "This is for my brother, you murderer," shouted Chase as he charged forward. With a loud cry, he tackled the bear right in the chest. Skye watched with bated breath as the force of the blow pushed the bear off the edge of the cliff, hurling it into the dark chasm below. Skye didn't stop watching the falling bear until she could see it no more and turned away, trying not to visualize the gory fate. Instead, she focused on Chase, who looked at the location of where the bear fell while taking deep breaths. He then quickly turned back into the cave. Landing back on the ground, Skye retracted her wings and headed forward, eyeing a large puddle of blood that smelled just like. "No, no, please." Skye rushed in, but paused upon seeing a sight that shattered her heart. Chase held Marshall's blood-covered collar that was starting to mix with the tears that were falling from his eyes. Slowly, he looked up at Skye with a pleading face. "Please tell me." "Tell you what?" asked Skye, who started to feel her own waterworks coming out. "Tell me this is a dream, tell me this isn't real, and that when I wake up Marshall will be in his doghouse, washing it, and then tripping on his hose and spraying Rocky again. And we all just laugh, because that's Marshall being Marshall," whispered Chase as he lowered his head. "Please, Skye, tell me he's not dead." Skye slowly walked over to Chase and nuzzled him, holding him closer to her as she felt the collar between both their chests. "Chase. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She closed her eyes as she felt him breath heavier and heavier, hyperventilating worse with each breath. Until at last, he unleashed it all in a painful scream. "Oyeg." Chase fell to the floor, cradling the collar as he openly bawled. Mud, tears, and rain decorated his defeated face as he screamed, "He promised. He promised. Oh. Marshall. Marshall. Please don't leave me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. You're not an annoyance, you're my brother. Don't leave like Dad did. Please. I love you. Please. I love you. Please, please, please. Marshall, please." Never before had Chase looked so broken in the eyes of Skye. The once strong and capable leader that she always admired, even before her feeling for him, left her speechless. It was like looking at a little newborn, alone and scared in a world of nothing but darkness. His sorrowful cries rang even in Skye's soul as she lay her head over his and cried with him. Nothing, she said, could heal this. She wasn't sure if anything could heal this. Marshall, her comrade, her friend, was gone forever and nothing would ever be the same. Paw Patrol would never be the same. "I need to call Ryder," whispered Skye, figuring he and the rest of the pups deserved to hear the news. Chase didn't say anything, he just whimpered. Pressing her communicator tag, she called for her owner. "Skye? Thank goodness. What happened? Are you and Chase safe?" cried out Ryder on the other end. "Our Ryder," whispered Skye, trying to find the words. "Skye? And Marshall's dead." Another cry exited Chase as Skye winced. The other line was quiet as Skye waited. "Aryys sure? Is there a body?" asked Ryder, his voice cracked. "We found his collar, and his blood, in a bear's cave," said Skye, trying to not imagine the grim final moments of the Dalmatian's short life. All she could hope was that he didn't suffer long and was at peace. There was a long silence, only broken up by Chase's crying. Finally, Ryder said, "Are you safe?" "We are. When the storm ends, come home." "Ryder. I'm sorry. It's all our fault, if we hadn't." "Skye, just don't blame yourselves, please." Skye swore that before the call ended, she heard a heartbroken cry. Ryder looked at the pup pad in his hands as tears from his eyes dripped down on the screen. Marshall was gone. One of his pups was gone. he failed. He failed Marshall and the rest of the team. A part of him wanted to throw his pup pad to the floor, head downstairs, and scream at the others for what they had done. It was their fault Marshall ran away. It was their fault he died. It was their fault they couldn't save him. But as much as Ryder wanted to do that, he couldn't. He loved his pups. All of them were important, even when they made a mistake. They never meant to have Marshall leave on purpose, nor did they want him dead. He saw the regret in their eyes, and this new news would destroy them. He never would wish this on anyone, to lose someone that they cared about so much. He didn't even know what he was going to tell Blaze and Misty. They trusted him to look after Marshall, but he let them down. He let their only son die. Not in the face of duty, but in the cold and harsh forest where he had been devoured by a bear. Ryder knew there was always always danger when he stared Paw Patrol. His father even lost 3 different pups in rescue rovers before replacing them. Ryder swore that would never happen with Paw Patrol, but that promise was now broken. They were more than a team, they were a family. This was even truer for Rocky, Zuma, and Rubble, who didn't have parents like Marshall or Sky or Chase. And now they had to mourn the loss of one of their own. Sky sounded all broken up, but he could also hear the whimpering cries of Chase. Marshall had been one of the key rocks for the police pup after Trigger had died in the line of duty. And now that he had lost another important figure in his life, what was that going to do to Chase mentally? He didn't know how the other pups would take it. Still, it was best to tell them now, as delaying would help no one. Taking the elevator down, Ryder watched as all zoomed towards him with anticipation. "Did they find him?" asked Zuma. "Is he okay?" asked Rocky. He looked at all 3 of them while clenching his fist. He knew once he told them the truth, nothing would ever be the same for all of them again. "I'm sorry, pups, but we found Marshall's tag with a lot of blood on it, in a bear's cave." Their eyes widened with horror. "Because of this, Marshall has been declared deceased." "No," shouted Rubble as he ran away, right outside. Ryder knew where he was going. Whenever Rubble got upset, he locked himself in his doghouse and refused to come out. He didn't blame Rubble. In fact, Ryder himself wanted to lock himself in his room and just cry. I can't believe it," muttered Rocky, tears in his eyes. "Not Marshall. Tell me they at least found his body." Ryder shook his head as Rocky began to weep. Marshall. I'm so sorry. I don't know if you can hear me up there, but I am so sorry." "WWW whispered Zuma, whose lip as trembling as his eyes began to water. You said he'd be all right." Rocky shook his head and looked at Zuma. I'm sorry. It's not fair, screamed Zuma as he dived into Rocky's arms. Wawawa. Marshall. Ryder turned away. He just went back to elevator and rode it all the way up. He could still hear Zuma's wails. He couldn't do this. He needed help. He turned on his pup pad and called for his father. A few rings later, he saw his dad ready to greet him, but showed concern when he saw his son crying. "Ryder? What happened?" Dad," whimpered Ryder as he fell to his knees. I lost a friend." His grandfather cut for all of Adventure Bay had turned out for the memorial at the lookout. It had been decorated with black, white, and red banners with the Paw Patrol logo temporarily covered with a flag of Marshall's fire pup tag. The entire town, dressed for the occasion, had come together for this tragic event, even a few outsiders of Adventure Bay. Mr. Porter had been comforting his grandson, Alex, the entire time as he cried on his grandfather's shoulders. Captain Turbot had his hat off, placing it over his heart as a sign of respect, while the other hand used a tissue to dry his tears. Farmer Yumi and Al held hands as they muttered in prayer. Fuzzy and his flock were nearby as well, the little goose being held by his mother as he tried furiously to fly to the memorial statue in tears. Ryder, who had been crying silently, had his father holding his shoulder for support while Katie was on the other side holding his hand. The pet groomer gave him a comforting smile, letting him know that she was there for him. Even Callie was there, in a black collar and looking somber. The saddest ones, besides Ryder, were two other groups, the pups themselves and Marshall's parents. All of the pups had dressed up in their Paw Patrol uniforms, but with a black scarf wrapped around their necks as a sign of mourning. Words couldn't describe the looks on their faces that combined guilt, shame, and sorrow into one heartbreaking emotion. None of them had any tears that flowed out, nor did they ever stop looking at the giant memorial statue of Marshall, which featured Hamed standing proud for all to see. The marble statue had a golden plate that read, "In loving memory of Marshall. A proud fire pup of Paw Patrol. Just do my best. Forget the rest." The only ones missing was Everest and her owner Jake. They tried to get a signal, but it was jammed by the storms. Ryder could only think how devastated they would be once they learned of Marshall's fate. Mayor Goodway walked up to a small podium, wearing a funeral dress and shawl. Clearing her throat, she said, "We are all gathered here today in remembrance one of Adventure Bay's greatest heroes. He was brave, kind, and faithful to us all. Marshall of Paw Patrol was not just another dog, he was part of our community, our family. He was a rescuer, a friend, and a son to us." She turned to the weeping parents and their fire team who had come to support their dogs. Blaze was comforting his sobbing wife, who held on to a picture of Marshall that was shot not long after he was born. Nobody knew what to say to the two dogs who had lost their only son. If anything, the Paw Patrol wished they were hated by them instead of forgiven. They told them everything. How it was all their fault that their son ran away and met his death. They looked at the five long and hard as they awaited their punishment. In the end, they sighed and forgave them. They said Marshall would want them to, and they knew the pups never really meant for this to happen. It still didn't stop them from blaming themselves. They even offered to surrender their dog tags in shame to Ryder, offering to be sent away to new owners, but Ryder outright refused. They were a family, and Marshall wouldn't want them to split up. "Even if I did say that though, that doesn't mean we won't have this hanging over us for the rest of our lives," thought Ryder as the mayor ended her speech and gave the floor to Ryder. Ryder squeezed Katie's hand before walking up to the podium. He stared at the crowd for a bit before closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. Marshall was. I guess it's hard to say what he was. Brave? Gentle? Happy? I think about that with all my pups. But the one thing I think about most when it comes to Marshall, from now and forever, will be his love. He opened his eyes and smiled. With Marshall, he loved everything and everyone. He loved life to the fullest, and made sure to smile every day, showing how much he loved who he was and what he was doing. His love was something we all felt in our hearts when we were with him. He had a presence that made you think he was the rays of sunshine itself. He clenched his fist. It's true that, it may seem like those rays are gone. However, I think if we remember who Marshall was, and that feeling of love we associated with him, then we can still feel those rays as he watches us from below. Ryder lowered his head and turned away. He didn't want to see the reactions of his speech. He just wanted to look at the statue of Marshall. I'm gonna miss you, buddy. If there is a heaven for dogs, you deserve it. Ryder sighed before walking over to his father and Katie. He hugged both before turning back to the memorial. Getting the signal from the mayor, a bagpipe player began to blow into his instrument as Rubble walked forward with Chase, Zuma, Sky, and Rocky carrying a small casket on their shoulders. There was no body to bury, so they placed Marshall's dog tag in the casket along with a photo of him. Rubble, using his shovel, dug the hole in front of the statue and allowed the others to slowly lower the casket into the grave before he sealed it up with the dirt. When the last of the dirt was patted, the bagpipes ended and the crowd began to walk away. There would be no reception, just some time alone to deal with this new reality they were in. Everyone eventually made their way to the lookout, except for Chase, who stood there and stared at the statue with an emotionless face. Sky looked back at him for a bit before following the others inside. The first thing Marshall felt as he slowly began to come into consciousness was the warm wrappings around him. He didn't feel any pain, nor did he feel cold. He tried to remember the last thing he saw, and soon it all came back to him. Running away. The bear. The cold. His final moments. Did I die? He slowly opened his eyes, but didn't see puffy clouds or rays of unearthly light. Rather a warm cottage bedroom where he was under the covers of a warm bed. Not what I expected heaven to look like. Marshall. You're awake, shouted a familiar voice as Marshall nearly gasped upon seeing Everest jumped onto the bed, wagging her tail. She proceeded to lick him a few times before she stopped and blushed. Sorry about that. Everett? You're in puppy heaven too? Asked Marshall in shock. Everest giggled. I'm not dead. Neither are you. Me and Jake found you in a cave 3 days ago and brought you back here. I'm not dead, whispered Marshall as a smile began to grow on his face. He was about to jump up with joy, but he hissed and touched his wound, which was now bandaged up. Careful, you're still not fully healed, said Everest, forcing him back on his pillow. You were really weak when we found you. You gotta take it easy. Marshall nodded. Thanks, Everest. I owe you my life. No problem. I'm just glad we rescued you. Arf, said the husky with a smile. She then frowned before asking, Hey, Marshall? Why did you run away? Ryder and the pups were really worried about you. They were? Asked Marshall in shock. Ryder he could understand, but didn't the pups hate him? Yeah, Ryder had them looking all day when we last had contact. Rocky seemed to be really upset, said it was his and the other pup's fault and they wanted to apologize or something, said Everest. Oh really? Asked Marshall as a tear dropped down from his eye. They were looking for me? Where are they now? We don't know. My communicator tag isn't able to transmit due to the snowstorm outside. We haven't had outside contact in 3 days. You're lucky we decided to search for an extra hour before having to turn in because of the intensity, explained Everest. Marshall sighed and cursed the weather. More than anything he wanted to see his friends again, and go home where he belonged. Will the snowstorm be leaving soon, Everest? Should be gone in a few hours, dude, said Jake as he entered the room with 2 hot cups. Glad to see you back from dreamland, Marshall. For a second we thought you weren't gonna make it. Everest here didn't even move from your bed for a whole day. Jake, hissed Everest in embarrassment, which made the boys laugh. Jake handed over Marshall a cup of hot tea, which the pup eagerly accepted. When he tasted it, however, he nearly gagged. Liver flavored. Oops, that's mine. Everest took the cup and began to sip it. Good. Accepting the warm regular green tea, Marshall felt his inner body light up as he drank the tea. Jake put the tray away before he asked, So Marshall, why did you decide to skip down and head into the woods on your own? Blushing, Marshall rubbed his paws and whispered, Actually, I was trying to get here. I wanted to live with you guys for a while. Why? I mean, not that I'm happy that you'd want to hang out here for a bit, dude, but why leave your friends? Marshall explained how that day started with him messing up everyone's day, and the big fight that he had with the other pups when he broke the TV. He talked about how he ran away, and all the bad stuff that happened along the way, including the crash and the bear. Everest gasped and hugged Marshall, sobbing after he explained how he had given up and was ready to die until they saved him. You should really thank Everest. She picked up your tracks and we found you in that cave, said Jake with a rare serious look. If we didn't find you, dude, I'm afraid you'd be cold and gone. Yeah, whispered Marshall, shivering at the fact that he was so close to death's cold touch and narrowly escaped it. He turned to a teary-eyed Everest and gave her a warm smile. I really owe you, Everest. Thanks. Silly, pup, chuckled Everest, blushing tea as she wiped away her tears. But Marshall, I don't think your friends hate you. Rocky looked really worried and scared for you when I saw him. I'm willing to bet all my liver treats that every one of the pups were hoping to find you and apologize. Oh really? You think that? Asked Marshall, hope filling his heart. I know so, proclaimed Everest. And as soon as the storm clears and we get a signal, we'll be able to get in contact with Ryder and the others. Marshall nodded as he couldn't help but wonder what the other pups were doing right now. It's been 3 days. I wonder if they're still looking for me. Chase still hadn't moved, and it had been 2 hours. Sky felt like she was watching 2 statues at the same time. After the service, nobody was in the mood to do much. Ryder was with Katie and his dad up on the 2nd floor. Rubble and Zuma were watching old videos of Marshall on the new TV they had. And Rocky was getting water for Marshall's parents, who were silent in the corner like their world had come to an end. It might as well be the end of the world, thought Sky as she thought about the future. With Marshall gone, who would be their fire pup? Would they get a replacement? The thought of someone taking over Marshall's spot invoked both fear and fury in her. No one would be able to replace Marshall. Ever. Worried about her crush, she decided to take a chance and exited the lookout. Walking up to Chase, who continued to stand there and look at the statue, she sat beside him without saying a word. Marshall would have loved it, said Chase, without looking at Sky. A sad smile appeared on his lip. Although, really it should be of him doing one of his silly acts. It seems more like him. Yeah. Said Sky, lowering her head. What I wouldn't give for one of those acts. I'm leaving Paw Patrol, muttered Chase, closing his eyes and whimpering in shame. Sky's eyes opened as wide as she could as she turned to face him. What? Why? Because how can I be a good police pup if I can't save my own best friend, whimpered Chase, as he stared back at his best friend's grave. I hurt Marshall. I betrayed him. If it wasn't for me, he wouldn't have run off like that, and got himself killed. I failed him as a best friend, a brother, and as a leader. If I can't help my best friend, or my dad, what good am I? And what about all the people you have saved? All of those civilians who pass by, and thank you for all the hard work you've done, shouted Sky, shoving her face into his. You think you're the only one that feels bad, Chase? We all are responsible. We all said those horrible words. We're all going to live with it for the rest of our lives, but I'm not gonna quit. You do that and Marshall will never forgive you. What do you know? You have a family. I have nobody anymore. My mom, dad, and Marshall are all dead. My mother died giving birth to me. I told my dad to go to work that day instead of spending time with me, and he got shot. I told Marshall he was an annoyance, and he runs away only to be eaten by a bear. I'm a curse, Sky. Everyone I love dies because of me. I should. He began to tear up as he turned away to hide his face. I should just disappear off the face of the earth. That way, none of you will die because of me. Chase. He turned around only to be met with a slap across the face. He held his red cheek before slowly turning to a glaring Sky. Don't ever say that again. Sky. Muttered Chase as he fell on his haunches. Don't ever wish such a thing, Chase. I lost one friend I cared about. I don't want to lose another. I don't want to lose you. Out of everyone here, you're the one I care about the most, whispered Sky, biting her lip. You think you lost those you care about? Ryder lost his mom in an accident. Katie's parents are divorced and refuse to speak to each other. Rocky, Zuma, and Rubble are all orphans for a reason you know. And we all lost Marshall. We all lost a precious friend. Not because of you and you alone. We all played a part in that loss, but maybe Maybe it just happened because it did. Chase wiped his eyes as Sky continued. I don't know if losing Marshall will ever heal, but I won't let this stop me from being what I want to be. A rescue pup. If you want to make your father, and Marshall, proud, you will keep doing what you can do to help people and prevent such tragedies from occurring. And remember, she walked up and nuzzled him, making them both blush. We're in this together, especially me with you, because... Chase. She closed her eyes and sighed. I love you. She heard Chase gasp, but a second later he hugged her and began to weep on her shoulders. I love you too. The two of them opened their eyes and looked deep into each other's gaze. Slowly, their muzzles began to inch closer. Suddenly, their communicator links activated at the same time, snapping them out of the moment. The signal was directed to all of them. Hello? Ryder? Pups? You there? It's Everest. Everest? What happened? We tried to communicate with you, but we got static, said Chase, blushing as he and Sky inched a bit closer, their tails wrapping around each other. Sorry about that. The snowstorm just cleared up. Glad we could get a signal. Listen, about Marshall. Both pups whimpered at the name and the thought of their friend learning the sad news. Everest. Marshall's gone, we found his collar and blood, we just had his funeral, said Ryder on his line. To their shock, Everest just giggled. Well, that's where you're wrong, Ryder. I found Marshall. He's alive. Alive, shouted not just Chase and Sky, but Ryder and all the other pups as well. Yup. See for yourself. The visual feed for the communicators came online and soon they saw what looked to be Jake's bedroom from their tags. Sky was sure her heart stopped, as did the others, as they saw a single Dalmatian on the bed, nervously waving. Hey, pups. How was my funeral? Asked Marshall, with a small smile. The moment Everest hung up the call, Marshall felt a flood of emotions overwhelm him. Everyone had been crying, grateful that he was alive. His parents were there, holding each other as they told him they loved him. Ryder's face was the happiest he had ever seen. And then there were the pups. They missed him. They were mourning for him. He thought they didn't want him, but he was wrong. They searched everywhere, even through a storm, to find him. He never heard so many apologies at once, he could still hear them in his head. Marshall wanted nothing more than to leap out of the bed, rush down to Adventure Bay, and hug them all until his front paws fell off. But then he remembered how they hurt him. Yelled at him. His heart began to feel like it was in pain again. He could still remember those harsh words that drove him to do this. But they looked so sorry. He closed his eyes. He wanted to forgive his friends, he really did, but what if this happened again? Could he stay with Paw Patrol? Could he trust them? He had to make sure. Jake. Everest, asked Marshall, getting their attention. Can you do something for me? The moment the call ended, everyone got into their vehicles and rushed off for Jake's mountain, sirens blaring. Chase was pretty sure that everyone in Adventure Bay was confused by this, but that wasn't important. What was important was that Marshall, his brother, was alive. Chase wanted to cry, he probably was, but he was too busy rushing ahead of the rest of the pack as they drove up the mountain. Chase had so many things he wanted to say to Marshall, but most importantly was the apology. He didn't care if Marshall forgave him or not, he just wanted to hug him and tell him how sorry he was. He looked behind him and saw the rest of the Paw Patrol, Ryder's ATV, and his father's truck containing Katie and Marshall's parents. Looking up, he saw his crush, Sky, not too far behind him. He blushed thinking about how they confessed just moments ago and were about to kiss. "Are we boyfriend and girlfriend now?" He knew they had to have a talk, but only after they had talked to Marshall first. Before he knew it, he reached the main cabin where Jake and Everest lived and was about to rush inside when the said pup and owner stood in front of the door. "Wow, dude. Can't go in there yet. We need to talk." "Jake, you have to let me in. I need to see Marshall," shouted Chase, growling and showing his teeth. Upon seeing her owner threatened, Everest stood up in front of Chase and growled back. He said to wait. "If you actually use your head for a change, you won't do something stupid like you did to Marshall." "What did you say?" "I'm his best friend," shouted Chase. "At least I was a better friend than you six were," shouted Everest. "You don't dash." "Chase. Heel." Ryder's command instantly made him stop and sit down. He slowly turned around and saw how the others were staring at him with either worry or disappointment. Ryder walked up, shaking his head before he put his hand on his dog's head. "I know you want to see Marshall, but yelling at the ones who saved him isn't going to help." Chase whimpered in shame as he looked at Marshall's saviors and bowed. I am sorry." "You're right, Everest. I haven't been a good friend. I helped make this horrible mistake happen. Forgive me?" Everest didn't say anything, but sighed. "I'll forgive you if Marshall does." Which leads us to what we need to talk about. "Marshall wants to talk to you in 3 groups, said Jake, shaking his head. "Dude's been through a lot and wants to get some stuff off his chest." "Does he hate us?" asked Rubble, whimpering. Jake and Everest looked at each other before the former answered, "We don't know. That's up to you guys to find out." The 5 pups sighed and lowered their heads even further. Chase closed his eyes and realized that he might never get Marshall's trust again after what happened. Yet, we deserve it. Our actions caused all this to happen. If Marshall can't forgive me or the other pups, I'll just have to live the burden for the rest of my life. "Who's going first?" asked Ryder's father. "He wants his parents first," said Everest. Without wasting a second, the 2 adult Dalmatians rushed in to see their son, followed by Jake and Everest. Chase whimpered in shame as he looked at Marshall's saviors and bowed. "Mom. Dad," shouted Marshall as he was tackled by his 2 parents. He laughed with joy as they nuzzled, barked, and licked. It made Jake and Everest smile as they watched the family. After the excitement had worn off, the 2 hugged their child with tears dripping down their eyes. Marshall whimpered, but a smile was on his face. I missed you. I thought, when I was going to die. I. What were you thinking, Marshall?" shouted Misty in a tone that made everyone in the room wince. "You almost died out there. How could you do something so stupid as run away from your home? If you were that upset, or needed to be away for a while, you could have told us, and we could have taken you home. Instead, we thought you." With a heartfelt cry, Misty held on to her son as Blaze nuzzled his wife. "When we heard you died, we thought our world had fallen apart. We didn't know what to do. How could we have gone on without our baby boy?" Marshall felt the guilt in his heart stab him again and again like a harpoon. "I didn't mean to make you cry. It was stupid, and I'm sorry. I'll never run away again. It's okay, Marshall, whispered Blaze as he hugged his son and smiled. You're safe, thanks to Jake and Everest. That's all that matters. Yeah, I owe them a lot, whispered Marshall, giving Everest a smile. In fact, he turned around and gave Everest a toothy smile. Everest, you have my permission to marry my son. Welcome to the family. What/Dad, shouted both Everest and Marshall, who blushed as images of them in a wedding ceremony entered their heads. Misty rolled her eyes and swatted her laughing husband in the face. Ignore him. He's being an idiot again. Just trying to lighten the mood. Marshall giggled before sighing. I'm really sorry I ran away. If you want to bring me home as punishment, I understand. Don't you want to stay with Paw Patrol? Asked Blaze. Marshall lowered his gaze. I don't know what if Ryder is upset with me. What about the pups and what they did to me? Blaze put a paw on his son's shoulder. Marshall, your friends were all mourning for you at your funeral just a few hours ago. They regret what they did and showed how much they loved you by looking for you nonstop. Did you know that they offered to be punished by us for what they did? They did? Why? Asked Marshall. Because they thought they were responsible or your death, said Misty. They submitted judgment to us. We could have done anything to them, but we chose to forgive them. Just one look into their eyes, and we could tell they would have taken everything back that they said about you. Marshall didn't know what to say, he just sighed and nodded. I see.
Said much.
After a long talk and a hug session with his parents, Marshall called for Ryder and his dad. Katie decided to stay behind, seeing as this was a family thing and she was only here for support. When Marshall saw his owner's face to face for the first time in days, he jumped a bed and into his arms, laughing and licking him. Ryder, with tears on his, laughed as he hugged his fire pup harder than he ever could. Ryder's father smiled and scratched the Dalmatian's ear. Good to see you're among the living, Marshall. Thanks, Professor, said Marshall before he turned to Ryder and whimpered. I'm sorry. I wasn't a good pup. What do you mean, Marshall? Asked Ryder. I ran away and worried everyone. Even worse, I made you all think I was dead. I'm so sorry. Marshall jumped off Ryder's arms and back towards the bed, his back facing his owner. If you don't want me anymore, for what I did. I understand. A surprise hug was the answer as Ryder whispered, Don't ever say that, Marshall. You're one of my pups. If anything, this is my entire fault. I'm responsible for you and I failed. I'm so sorry. Ryder, it's not your fault, shouted Marshall, turning around and shaking his head. It's mine. I ran away. But I should have stopped you or known what the other pups did, said Ryder. I didn't tell anyone. I should have gone to talk to you. Enough, shouted Ryder's dad as he got their attention. The truth is there is a lot to be blamed for, but there is no point in thinking about it as it's all in the past. He put his hand on both pup and owner and smiled at them. You two found each other and you've learned from your mistakes. That's the most important part. He turned to his son. Ryder, did you not scold the pups for their actions and organize the best rescue you could to find Marshall?
No.
Never once giving up until it seemed all was lost? You did your best to rescue Marshall and showed how much you cared for him. But most importantly, you kept calm when the situation called for it. And don't say you could have prevented this, your pups should have known better than to do what they did. And I have a feeling they know better now, thanks to this experience. He then turned to Marshall. Marshall, what you did was foolish, but we understand you were hurt. But never think that there isn't someone out there who loves you. You are family to me and Ryder, and he'll always be there for you. And I know you may be thinking the pup betrayed you, but friends fight all the time. They care about you. Did you know that Chase and Sky fought a bear together because they believed it killed you? Wait, that bear? The one that hurt me? Asked Marshall, jaw-dropping. Yup. Chase and Sky ignored my orders to come home cause of the storm and continued to look for you. They fought that bear and won, for you. Marshall just sat there, stunned beyond all reason. His friends. They fought for him. They almost died for him. He closed his eyes and nodded. Ryder, I think I need to talk to the pups. One by one, they all came in. Marshall sat there on the bed, doing his best to keep calm and not lash out in anger or hug his friends in tears. He saw the nervous and guilty looks they were giving him, but he had to make sure. For a long time, there was no talking. Finally, Chase stepped forward. Marshall, we'd dash. Stop, ordered Marshall, holding out his paw. Chase obeyed and stood down. Marshall closed his eyes. Before we talk. Before you tell me how sorry you are. Before you do anything. Let me get something out of the way. Marshall took a deep breath and, for the first time in his entire life, spoke in anger. You betrayed me. The five winced, but continued to stand as Marshall let out everything he had been holding in for so long. How could you say all those mean things to me? After everything we'd been through? I trusted you. I loved you all. I thought of you as family, and you stabbed me in the back. Yes, I make mistakes. Yes, I am a klutz. But at least I don't tell my friends they are annoyances or worthless. He growled, showing his teeth as he got up and stood before the whimpering pups, who were already tearing up. I would do anything for you five. Anything. Especially you, Chase, shouted Marshall, glaring at the police pup. I was there when your dad died. I was there for you all the way. You were my brother. And yet you yelled at me like I was some kind of criminal. He barked in anger. I ran away because I felt that I wasn't needed by any of you, and I almost died doing so. Yeah, running away was stupid, but so was bullying me. Marshall continued to huff and puff, but there was also something else he was doing that caught the eyes of the pups. He was crying. Tears leaked down from his eyes as he lowered his head, muttering, "But I can't hate you. Any of you. Every time I try, I just think about all the fun times we have had together growing up. All the missions we did, and the lives we helped. I think about how much we've grown close, and I want to believe that feeling is still there. I want to still love you five, even though you hurt me." Their ears perked as Marshall continued, I heard everything of what you pups did when I left. I want to know, right now from each of you, why did you do that? Why go through a storm and fight a bear just to bring me home? You made it clear you didn't think I was fit for Paw Patrol anyway. Rubble was the first to answer. Because you're our buddy. They all glanced at him. What we did, it was stupid. Apollo was just a TV show, and we shouldn't have said those things to you, Marshall. It was wrong. We were wrong, and when we realized what we did. Rubble sniffed as he began to tear up. When we thought we lost you, it felt like nothing we would ever do would make up for our mistake. That nothing would ever be happy again. Rubble's right, said Rocky, lowering his head. We're ashamed of what we did. There's nothing wrong with being clumsy, we've lived with it for so long, and we love you for being you. When I thought you were dead, Marshall, I prayed that you were still alive. I offered anything to see you again, even drowning myself in water if it meant having you back. Rocky walked over and gently licked Marshall's cheek. Do you remember when you took care of me when the others dealt with those bullies? You stood by me, and I let you down. I promise that will never happen again. Before Marshall could answer, he was tackled by a crying Zuma, much to everyone's surprise. The sobbing chocolate Labrador held him tight and didn't dare let go. Please tell me it's real. Please tell me that you're still alive. Marshall's expression softened as he gently rubbed Zuma's head. Yeah, Zuma. I'm here. Wah! Cried Zuma, hugging tighter. When I hod. I wanted you. Marshall. Marshall didn't say anything, he just hugged his friend and nuzzled him. I'm alive, Zuma. You don't have to worry. I don't care if you forgive us or not. I mean, I would like it, but... He rubbed his eyes and gave Marshall a warm smile. Knowing you're alive is enough for me, big bro. Zuma. Marshall began to tear up and hug the little pup. I'm sorry I worried you. Marshall. I'm so sorry, whispered Sky as she got onto his bed and whimpered. I acted just like those bullies from my past. When it hit me what I did, I just wanted to sink into the earth in shame. She started to tear up. I saw your fire truck, your blood at the bear's cave. I thought I lost one of my best friends, and it was all my fault. If I stood up for you, any of us, this didn't have to happen. It's all our fault. You shouldn't even be injured in the first place, you should have been with us at the lookout. Turning away, she lowered her head. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Sky. Whispered Marshall, as he closed his eyes and thought about his long journey. Did you and Chase really fight that bear, for me? Fought and killed, whimpered Sky, turning green. I never wanted to, but... I'd fight 100 bears for you, Marshall. A real smile made it to Marshall's lips as he then turned to Chase, who stood there as still as a statue. Everyone waited with awaited breath as Marshall got up and jumped down, walking over to the police dog. The two eyed each other, neither moving or saying anything. The four nervously looked at each other with concern before Chase took a deep breath. This is for running away and nearly getting killed. Pow! The four other pups gasped as Chase's paw smacked into Marshall's face, knocking him back. Chase sighed and said, Your turn. Marshall's stunned face slowly transformed into a growl as he charged at Chase, knocking him over. The two pups barked and began to rough each other up, biting and slamming their paws against each other. Chase kicked Marshall out of him before ramming him into the wall. Marshall yipped in pain before using his rear leg to kick Chase in the gut and throw him off. Marshall. Chase. Stop it, shouted Sky. What the heck do you guys think you're doing? Shouted Rubble. The two pups ignored their friends and Chase took off, Marshall running right after him with an angry bark. They rushed out of the cottage and into the snowy fields outside, much to the shock of the rest of the gang. Marshall finally tackled Chase as he bit his tail as hard as he could, making the police dog howl. The audience as shocked by this as the pups ran out and Sky shouted, Ryder. Make them stop. Ryder was about to, but his father stopped him and shook his head. They need this. Marshall, cried out Misty, turning to her husband. Blaze, stop them. No, he answered much to her shock. He stared at the fight with knowing eyes. This is between them, as brothers. Like it was with me and Trigger. Chase had taken some snow and thrown it in Marshall's face before smacking him a few more times with his paw before setting him up in a chokehold. Marshall gasped for air as he felt Chase's front legs wrapped around his neck. With all his strength, Marshall elbowed Chase in the cut and bit his neck, dragging him down as he continued his attack. The group watched in horror, except for Blaze and the professor, as both dogs continued to tear each other apart. even to the point of bleeding. After a long period of trying to get on top, the two broke away from each other and started hitting each other with their paws again. One would make contact, while the other countered with a blow of their own. At first, it seemed like this would never end, but slowly they began to slow down. And besides the grunting, there was crying. The audience's eyes widened as they saw both Marshall and Chase crying as they continued to hit each other, the force of their blows getting weaker and weaker with each moment. Finally, neither could lift their paws against each other. For a whole minute they stared at each other, and then hugged. Nuzzling each other, the two brothers cried side by side as they whimpered, not from the pain from their fight, but the pain being released from their hearts. Naturally, there were some confused pups and humans. "I don't get it," said Everest, shaking her head. "They were ready to kill each other and now they're hugging each other like nothing has changed." "Why?" "Because they're brothers," answered Blaze, smiling at the scene before him. "True brothers will always love each other, even in the worst of times. Sometimes you want to hug them, sometimes you want to punch them." All the fighting was their way of talking, to saying what need to be said. All the emotion in each blow, and now that it's all used up, all that anger and regret, they can heal. Blaze sighed as a nostalgic look in his eyes made him water. "Trigger and I did it all the time. Those two, they're just like us." "So, he forgives Chase?" asked Rocky. "He was going to forgive you all no matter what," said Blaze, laughing. "That's just how Marshall is." "I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry," said Chase. "I love you, Marshall, always." "I love you too, Chase," said Marshall, breaking the hug and smiling. "Sorry, I almost broke the promise." "Forget the promise, Marshall," said Chase, as he smiled back. "Promise me that if I ever do something as stupid as call you an annoyance again, you'll punch me?" "Promise," whispered Marshall as he hugged him again. I forgive you. All of you." "Thank you," whispered Chase before grinning. "You know I went easy on you, right?" "Yeah, big softy," whispered Marshall before he sniffed the air and his eyes widened. Breaking the hug, he raised his eyebrow and stared at Chase with a suspicious smirk. "Why do I smell sky scent on you? Close to your mouth?" A blush appeared on Chase's face. "Ugh, no reason?" "Oh my gosh, you two kissed, didn't ya?" shouted Marshall, earning everybody's attention before they all turned their attention towards Sky, who was just as red as Chase. "And no, I didn't kiss her yet," shouted Chase, eyes widening upon realizing what he said. I mean." Marshall was now laughing hysterically as he laid on his back, kicking in the air. The others soon joined him except for Sky, who was shaking her head. 3 months later. Said Katie as she checked Marshall's side again, the rest of the pups and Ryder waiting in the medical room with them in anticipation. Smiling, Katie nodded, "Yup. He's good to go." The pups cheered with excitement as Marshall pumped his paw in the air. "Yes. This pup's back in the game." "Great to have you officially back, Marshall," said Ryder, scratching Marshall's ear much to his pleasure. "Yeah, although it was funny seeing all us take turns in your uniform," replied Sky. "I don't know, I think you looked kinda of cute in it," replied a grinning Chase, which earned him a peck on the cheek from his girlfriend. "Ugh, get a room," muttered Zuma, rolling his eyes. 3 months as a couple, and you two can't keep your paws off each other. What can I say? I can't get enough of her," said Chase, nuzzling Sky affectionately. A beep on Ryder's pup pad alerted everyone of a possible rescue mission as the owner opened the channel. "Hello, what's up?" "Ryder. We got a gas leak in my store. Alex and I are already outside safe, but we need to stop it as soon as possible. Can you help?" "No problem, Mr. Porter," said Ryder as he raised his arm. "No job is too big, no pup is too small." He turned to his pup team and smiled. "Paw Patrol. To the lookout. Let's go." the six shouted as they made their way to the elevator. Marshall jumped from his bed and shouted, "Wait for me." Just as he exited, his paw got caught in a play rope and tripped. Whoa! Whoa! He bounced off a cushion, slammed into a wall, and started to roll towards the elevator. "Heads up!" "Uh-oh," said the pups before they were bowled over by Marshall and ended up in a tangle. Blushing, Marshall whispered, "Sorry, pups. Guess this is proof that I'm all better, huh?" The six laughed as the elevator rose. Yup. Things were all better again.
So, Leute, bevor wir noch diesen Livestream abschließen, wir werden noch, wie gesagt, noch die drei Creepypasts, die zwei Short Creepypasts noch anhören. Das sagt Tickets Accident und Dings. Und ja, legen wir mal los und hoffentlich bereit.
PAW. Have you ever heard of the Nickelodeon/Nick Jr. hit show, PAW Patrol? In case you haven't, the show is about 6 heroic puppies: Chase, Marshall, Zuma, Rubble, Sky, and Rocky, and their 10-year-old leader, Ryder. They go around helping Adventure Bay through many emergencies, be it a kitten stranded at sea on a boat or the Adventure Bay snow monster. But that's not why I am here. My name is Steven, and I'm here to unravel something that you'll find hard to believe. You know Rubble, the construction pup who just so happens is the recent newest member of the PAW Patrol? When Rubble was inducted as an official member of the team, it got me thinking. What if Rubble was a replacement? And if so, who did he replace? And knowing me, you know I'd never rest until I get to the bottom of things that strike curiosity in me. So, I shunned almost everyone out of my life except for my friends who were PAW patrollers as well. We barricaded ourselves in my room as we began searching for clues to finalize the question on my mind about Rubble. Searching the internet wasn't working, and we couldn't ask our classmates about it, or we would be a laughingstock for liking a preschool series. I was about to give up until my friend, let's call him Larry, gave me the idea of contacting Nickelodeon about it. Larry always gave good ideas and he helped a lot. So when I got home from school, I sent Nickelodeon an email about my curiosity. I included my name and a deep description saying that I believed that Rubble replaced a former member of the PAW Patrol since he recently became the newest member of the team. When I got an email back from them, I was shocked to find a document file was attached. The email itself only said, "Read this." So, I clicked on the file and downloaded it. When I opened it, my question was answered. Turns out, there was a pup before Rubble who was a member of the PAW Patrol. His name was Rex, and like Rubble, were an English bulldog and a construction pup of the team. He had light brown fur on the top half of his body, and the lower half of his body was white. His paws were dark brown, resembling dirt. He was well loved by everyone. As I read on, I learned that Rex was really close to Chase and Marshall and usually performed pranks to the two of them, had a crush on Zuma, and tried to help Rocky overcome his aquaphobia. But the final paragraph in the doc file made me wish I didn't send the email. During a mission to re-rail a train from crashing into the train station, Rex got his paw stuck to the railing. With the train coming at a fast pace, Rex had to move fast. He called out to the others for help, and Marshall, Chase, and Rocky quickly went to the train tracks to break Rex free, but Rex's paw wouldn't budge. The train's whistle began blowing as the train was speeding down the track, trying to switch to another track. The conductor screamed to the pups to move out of the way. Marshall, Chase, and Rocky all quickly moved out of the way in time, but Rex met his demise. The train ran over the poor pup, decapitating his body. The whole PAW patrol was splattered by Rex's blood and guts, and Marshall was struck by Rex's severed forearms. So after reading this, I came to understand that Rubble replacing Rex was a way to stop the talk about this horrifying incident and move on. The only ones who still know about the Rex incident are the cast of the show. But don't bother asking them about it. If you do, you'll either get a shrug or they'll just walk away from you. It is 2 in the morning, and like any other insomniac, I can't sleep. I have somewhere to go in the morning. Exactly where I am going is none of your business. So, on nights where it's impossible for me to go to sleep, I usually spend my time watching television online, mostly kids shows, like Barney and Friends or Dragon Tales, or Nick Jr. shows, like Max and Ruby, PAW Patrol, or Blaze and the Monster Machines. Don't make fun of me for watching kiddie shows. I am one intact with my inner child. Anyway, I am a huge fan of PAW Patrol. It's one of the shows on Nick Jr. I can watch without wanting to gouge my eyes out. Out of the pups, Rubble is my favorite. He doesn't get much love like the rest of the pups do. Anyway, back to my story. Since I couldn't sleep, I thought it was a good idea to go online and watch some PAW Patrol episodes. I had them all downloaded onto my PC via torrent. But, before I do that, I decided to look up some PAW Patrol images to help with the PAW Patrol wiki. So going to Google, I entered PAW Patrol images into the search box, and pressed enter. Some of the images seen were images from the show itself, but a couple caught my eye. One of which made me want to close my computer. The image depicted of Marshall sitting next to Chase, whose head was decapitated and placed on a wooden stick. The whole background was blood red, and on the bottom of the image, read, Chase had been a bad pup in black/red letters. I wanted to close out, but somehow, it attracted me to click to the site. So, there I was, the horrific page. The title of the site, Pup 666. Who created the website? Nobody knows. I clicked on more images. One looked like Sky was being cut open, her insides jutting out, that had the words, "Wanna see Sky's insides." Another was Zuma, getting his eyes gouged out by Rocky's pup pack, that had the words, "Got your eyes," and Rubble being decapitated by 2 unknown males, that didn't have any words. The final pick was the PAW Patrol pups, Everest included, all lined up, sitting in front of a motionless rider, with the words, "Oops, he's dead" written on the bottom. The next night, more images were uploaded to Pups 666. The most gruesome one was Everest having her heart pulled out, which made me want to vomit because 1, Everest is cute, and 2, I'm queasy when it comes to images like this. Boy, am I going to have nightmares tonight. If this was someone's idea of a joke, it's not funny. It's gruesome. So, I decided to save the images to my hard drive, just in case someone asks about it and don't believe me. The website's still out there if you want to find the gruesome images, but prepare to be scarred for life. I can never look at PAW Patrol the same way again. Curse my curiosity.
Pup 666. Look. If you dare.
Leute, das war's jetzt für das letzte Mal. Auf der Leute lassen. Spaß gemacht, wenn es euch Spaß gemacht hat, dann like nach oben, abonniert meinen Kanal und aktiviert die Glocke. Und wir sind aneinander gekommen von die Geschichten. Aber zurzeit, werde ich noch warten. Vielleicht werden noch vielleicht neue Geschichten kommen und so. Wenn vielleicht neue Geschichten kommen, werde ich euch dann updaten auf den Community und dort euch updaten, wenn vielleicht neue Geschichten dann kommen. Aber bis dann, wenn wir warten und hoffentlich bald wird es wieder eine neue Creepypasta geben oder etwas anderes mit Paw Patrol. Und ja Leute, ich verabschiede mich heute von hier. Danke für alle fürs Zuschauen und hoffentlich wir sehen uns bald wieder für den nächsten Paw Patrol Creepypasta. Und das war's für mich für heute. Danke an mein Team, das mir geholfen haben, für diese ganzen Dings zu durchhalten. Ich bin Super Chase und verabschiede mich hier. Und mein Team verabschiedet sich auch von hier. Und wir sehen uns im nächsten Live. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss.